He entered an isekai as a farmer with power surpassing that of the Demon Kings. The anime begins by introducing us to the hero of this story, named Mashio Hiraku, who is talking to a god who rules the world. This god explains to Hiraku that he had a very unhappy life, and that due to a terminal illness, he died after 39 years of a very horrible life. Therefore, he wants to give him another chance to live, granting him a healthy body free of any disease. This is because the reason why he had to live such a cruel life was partly his own error. Therefore, he wants to make up for his error by giving Hiraku the life he always wanted. The god then asks Hiraku if he has any requests, and after thinking about it for a long time, Hiraku tells him that he wants to try farming. Ever since he was stuck in his hospital bed, he really enjoyed watching a TV show that treated the farming experience as a great model of life. And since he could not be very sociable in his previous life, he would like to live a life farming peacefully in a place far away from civilization. The god of the world agrees and tells Hiraku that he will give him a new life and a healthy body. And after getting approval from the god of agriculture, he grants him the power of an almighty farming tool. And without explaining much about how it works, the god tells Hiraku to enjoy his new life to the fullest and sends him to a fantasy world. Hiraku then wakes up in a healthy body in the middle of a forest, being surprised at being able to move his body after so long without moving. And this made him very excited, so he said that he would start his new life farming in that world. But he realizes that he is in the middle of a forest, and that there is nothing around him except trees. Without knowing where to start, he remembers the almighty farming tool that God gave him, and as soon as he thinks about this tool, it magically appears in his hand. Upon using it, he realizes that it has a kind of magical power, as it can cut through hard soil and tree roots without any difficulty, and everything it touches becomes perfect for farming. Even so, Hiraku focuses on trying to find food and water. Therefore, he spends time searching for a river or something to eat. Unfortunately, he finds nothing, but instead, he finds a giant tree in the middle of the forest. And being a great landmark, he decides to establish his base there. And since he did not find any river or pond nearby, he decides to dig a well using his almighty farming tool. Fortunately, this special tool takes the form of any tool he can imagine, except for complicated machines. Thus, with a shovel, he manages to finish his well in a short time and discovers that he does not feel tired at all using his almighty tool. When he finally finds water, he decides that he needs to search for food, but realizes that he is not feeling hungry. Then he begins to build a proper base using his almighty tool, which makes his work much easier. In a short time, he manages to clear the surroundings of the huge tree, but cannot find anything edible. Upon seeing a tree in the way, he decides to transform his tool into an axe, planning to cut it down carefully, since it is in the way of his farming area. And despite planning to cut down the tree little by little with his axe, to my surprise, he cuts down the tree with a single swing, without making any effort. This surprises Hiraku himself, who runs to see despite the tree falling in seconds. Obviously, this is due to the ability that God gave him, so he loses no time and begins processing the wood. Thanks to his tool, he manages to cut this extremely high-quality wood as if it were butter, and soon gets rid of several trees. But despite having plenty of wood, Hiraku really has no idea how to build a house from scratch without using nails or adhesives. When the sun begins to set, he panics, because he has no light source, and since he cannot transform his farming tool into something that illuminates, he begins trying to make a campfire. However, as it is already too late, he transforms his tool into a chisel, to carve tools that will be used in the construction of his hut. When day breaks, he finally manages to make a campfire, and clear the area in order to make his farming field, and regardless of how long he works, he does not feel tired because of his tool. However, he realizes that he has started to feel hungry, and he plans to search for food. But before he can do anything, a wild rabbit jumps at him, which leaves him no choice but to use his tool to defend himself, without even planning his defense. He finishes off the rabbit easily, and this creature ends up being his first meal in this world. After finally having eaten, Hiraku builds a bathroom and begins working on the soil, preparing the field so that it receives a crop. He keeps thinking about everything he could plant to harvest, and during the night he finally finishes plowing the soil of his entire field, thinking about everything he could plant to harvest. At night he finally finishes plowing the soil across his entire field, but realizes that he still has no seeds to sow. Without much to do, he decides to sleep to look for seeds the next day. But when he wakes up, he is surprised to see that thanks to his farming tool, several plant sprouts have grown in the soil he had plowed. Therefore, the next thing he needs to do is protect his field from giant rabbits and other possible monsters. Hiraku begins to build a fence around the area and creates a large ditch to prevent rabbits from entering. During several days working on the fence, he managed to feed himself very well, thanks to the rabbits that tried to attack. Meanwhile, the plants grew faster and faster, especially when they were watered by the special tool. And yes, the tool can be transformed into a watering can. And after a lot of work, Hiraku finally manages to build a small hut, which, although not much, is better than living inside a log. Days pass, and unlike his previous life, Hiraku enjoys every day and feels increasingly motivated. One day, Hiraku finds 2 dogs that seem to be injured in the surroundings of his field. He then places a wooden board so that the 2 dogs can pass and feeds them with the meat of a boar. After a little while, Hiraku takes the dogs to his small hut to spend the night, since apparently the female was about to give birth. In fact, the next morning, Hiraku is thrilled to see 4 new puppies in the hut, so he cuts the best part of the boar to give to the dogs, in celebration of the birth of their little puppies. After a few days, he builds a larger hut for himself, since the dogs did not leave the first one he built. First, the new crops became ready, and he managed to harvest tomatoes. The little dogs that he named Kuro and Yuki apparently decided to live with him permanently. Thus, time goes by, with Hiraku being very happy, and the dogs take care of raising their puppies and patrol the surroundings. On the other hand, we see the god of the world again, who wonders how Hiraku is doing. But when he decides to take a look at this world, he is shocked to realize that he actually sent Hiraku to the Forest of Death, a very dangerous area, full of evil monsters. God becomes quite alarmed by this, but unfortunately he again cannot do anything to intervene, as that would be a clear violation of the rules. Back to Hiraku, well, he is quite calm. His crops have evolved a lot, and he realized that to sow his entire field, he only needs to think about the fruit or vegetable he desires while sowing the soil, and that is what will grow there, without the need for any seeds. He also planted fruit trees in the surrounding area, even knowing that they would take longer to bear fruit. The food also improved over time thanks to the vegetables, although unfortunately he was not able to get salt. As time went by, on a certain day, Hiraku noticed that the dogs have a horn on their heads, but he did not attach much importance to it, believing that this was due to him being in a different world. And thanks to the dogs, Hiraku could explore the forest without getting lost. And so one day he finally managed to reach a river. Then he planned to create a path to connect the water from the river to his house, even if it takes a long time, since the river is a 30-minute walk from his house. Still, Hiraku focuses on expanding his farming land, planting wheat and sugar cane to make sweets and other necessities. He soon realizes that it is getting colder and colder, and understands that winter is near. Therefore, he knows he needs to organize himself. He tries to use the hides of giant rabbits to protect himself from the cold. He also limits himself to collecting food for the winter. But one day his dogs come across something unusual, and when Hiraku goes to investigate, he finds a giant black cushion. At least that was what it appeared to be, and to his even greater surprise, he realizes that it really is a giant spider. She is very good at creating fabrics with her webs, and this spider begins to live there in the giant tree, feeding on the potatoes that Hiraku gives her, since that is her favorite food. In addition to fabrics, Hiraku discovers that the spider also knows how to make clothes to perfection, and even transforms animal hides into a coat, which is very good for the winter. With leaves and fabrics, Hiraku manages to make a bed to sleep on, in addition to curtains that block the wind and other things, making his house a more civilized place. And as the spider settled in the big tree, Hiraku decided to give her a name, naming her Zabuton. While the dogs take shelter in their own hut, the spider hibernates in her tree, and Hiraku stays all day in his hut, next to the campfire, feeding on unseasoned vegetables without salt. Despite his peaceful lifestyle, Hiraku cannot help but feel very lonely, since he cannot even remember the last time he spoke to someone, and worries about the possibility of having forgotten how to speak. Finally, the cold begins to dissipate, melting the snow, and with that spring arrives. Then, Hiraku finally leaves his house, and after a few days, he realizes that something is happening with the puppies, who have clearly grown up. One day the puppies enter the forest, leaving the place where they are, and Hiraku cannot help but feel joy and sadness for having raised them, and seeing them grow so well and so fast. To his surprise, a few days after the puppies return, as it turns out, everyone went into the forest in search of a mate. Suddenly, Hiraku was faced with another surprise. The spider appeared with a group of babies. Thus, all the animals living with Hiraku now have their own family, which makes him feel a little jealous and a little more lonely. Haraku still gladly devotes himself to the crops and is also expanding his fields. After all, now he has many mouths to feed. However, his work is interrupted by his watchman, who warns that there is an intruder nearby. Haraku knows that this is the alarm they established, so he runs off to investigate if it is something dangerous. Kiro guides him and takes him to the middle of the forest, where Haraku finds a naked albino little girl crying, without clothes and in terrible condition. The girl is trembling with fear as she is surrounded by dogs and the giant spider. Then, when she sees Haraku, she begs him to save her. Haraku is surprised to be able to understand her, so he approaches and offers his help so that the girl can be saved. But before he can do anything, the clever girl throws herself at him without warning, biting his neck. Haraku falls backward in surprise, while the girl begins to transform. The girl grows in a matter of seconds, revealing an older woman, now with clothes and without a single scratch. The girl thanks Haraku for having saved her, and in a short time the dogs jump and attack her again. Haraku stops them, and when the dogs back away, he realizes that the girl recovered her child body and is getting smaller again. Then he takes the opportunity to ask if she is an enemy or if she wants to hurt him. The girl says no, so she asks him to make his dogs back off, but he tells her that this only happened because she bit him. However, she says she could not help it. Haraku realizes that she really seems harmless, and soon understands that she only drank his blood to recover her strength. This is due to the fact that she used so much energy, failing to maintain the shape of her body or her clothes. Next, Haraku asks her why the dogs attacked her, and she responds that she thought she could take on one of them. So yes, it was she who started it all. However, Haraku feels bad about the beating she took, and offers to let her drink a little more of his blood so that she can recover. Then the little vampire begins to drink his blood, and although Haraku feels a bit weak because she is drinking a lot of his blood, he still feels that he can donate much more. This is probably due to the advantage of having such a healthy body. The little vampire grows again and comments that she has never tasted blood so full of vitality. Therefore, he must lead a very healthy life. Haraku looks at her for a second. He says that she is smaller than the last time she was transformed. The girl then responds that if she drinks more of his blood, he will be in danger. But Haraku says that she can drink as much as she wants because he does not like children. Thus, when she finishes, the girl returns to her original size and accompanies Haraku to his farming fields, being surprised by the existence of such a thing in that forest. Haraku shows her his crops and discovers that she had never seen a tomato before, so apparently they are not normal in that world. Even so, he makes her try a tomato and the girl is delighted with the flavor. Even though it is like a tomato man. Tomato is a bad thing. It is only good with a little salt and an egg. This makes Haraku very happy, as it is good to hear someone praise his work for the first time. Lululushi is more curious about the other crops, so Haraku spends the day showing the different types of vegetables he planted, thus spending a very pleasant afternoon with her. During the night, Haraku learns more about the girl. For example, her name is Lululushi, and she is a vampire who can use magic. In the hut, Lululushi was making notes on everything she learned, as she is researching medicinal plants and never imagined that she would be able to learn about so many new species in just one day. She says that she had a small fight with some nobles who were trying to steal her research, and after that, the nobles sent someone very skilled to pursue her. So she decided that it would be best to stay quiet somewhere until things settled down. That is the reason why she went to that forest, and also because being there could help with her research. However, she discovered more than she imagined, and now she has no idea how many days it will take her to inspect everything she saw in Haraku's field. Furthermore, she was almost wiped out at the beginning, so the place truly lives up to its wild reputation. Haraku asks her what she means by reputation, which confuses Lululushi greatly, and she asks if he really does not know, even after living in that forest for so long, that she knows all those wild creatures. However, Haraku responds saying that he has no idea what she is talking about, and without answering him, Lululushi changes the subject by talking about Haraku's tool, since she has never seen this type of magic before. Haraku does not speak much about his tool, and says that it is just a common magical tool. The girl comments excitedly that despite having lived for so long, she still has a lot to learn. Meanwhile, Haraku is deep in thought, as this was a day full of surprises, and he cannot believe that it was his Lululushi. Then he realizes that luck might not knock on his door again, and that is why he finds the answer to his doubts, and surprises the girl by asking her to stay with him forever, as he cannot let this opportunity slip away. Lululushi feels embarrassed by the sudden request, and explains that there are people pursuing her, and that she is a vampire. But Haraku assures her that none of that matters to him. He says that dealing with people was never good for him, and that is why he lives away from everyone. But he does not know for how many more years he will be able to handle this. Finally, Lulushi calms down and says that this was the most sudden marriage proposal she had ever received in her life. And Haraku responds saying that his life in the forest is very lonely, and so he thought it would be a good idea if she agreed to live with him. And Lulushi asks if he was serious when he asked her to stay with him forever. And Haraku realizes what he actually asked, and also blushes, leaving Lulushi slightly annoyed with him. She asks him if he was not asking her to marry him, and Haraku gets nervous, because he thinks that is exactly what he wants, and so he begs her to accept. Lulushi calms him down a bit, smiles, and tells him that she accepts his proposal. This makes Haraku very happy, and he cannot help but hug her to celebrate. Thus, Haraku and Lulushi start living in the hut and working together in the field. And after some time, Lulushi manages to help Haraku in various ways, such as installing light sources with magic. She also helps him find salt after so long, making the taste of their food improve significantly. One day, while both were observing the return of the fruit trees, Zabuton sounds the alarm again. And when they go to investigate, they find the dogs surrounding an angel, who asks their forgiveness for having attacked them first. Haraku hurries to release her from Zabuton's webs, and when the girl is finally free, she uses magic to heal her wounds and restore her clothes. Afterward, she makes her wings disappear, and Haraku is surprised and comments on how convenient it is to know how to use magic. But he becomes worried upon seeing that Lulushi is trying to hide. When the angel sees this, she becomes furious, saying that she should stop backing away and trying to run. But when she does so, the dogs attack again, and then she has no choice but to calm down and go to the hut to have a calmer conversation. There, the two girls talk about how fighting against the Inferno Hounds is truly a death sentence. The angel then asks Lulushi about Haraku, and she responds with a blushing face saying that he is her husband. This surprises the angel quite a bit, as this is the first time she sees Lulushi being loved by someone. She decides to introduce herself properly, making her wings appear again and saying that her name is Tia, and she is an angel. Haraku asks if she serves God directly, but Lulushi assures him that being an angel is not all that important, and that angels are just a race of warriors with more muscle than brains. This offends Tia, who clarifies that there was a time when angels were worshipped, but now they are just normal beings. Haraku asks her why she is pursuing Lulushi, and she responds saying that there is a large bounty for all the damage she caused in the city. And Lulushi apologizes saying that there was a very annoying noble who forced her to make medicine and drugs in a demanding manner. So, she felt the need to teach him a small lesson. Tia complains that there was nothing small about what she did, explaining that every time something bothered her, she started blowing everything up. And Lulushi finally admits that maybe she did something wrong, and comments to Haraku that the reason why she ended up in the forest is because she was running away from Tia, because this angel is a little bit stronger than her. Tia is surprised by the fact that Lulushi admits that she is weaker, and then Lulushi explains that she was only able to realize how weak she really is when she faced Haraku's dogs. Tia immediately understands that feeling, as not even she managed to face them. Lulushi then sets the matter aside and loses no time in proposing that Tia come live with them. Before the girl can answer, Lulushi shows her the farming fields and the fruit tree orchards. She also introduces Zabuton, but upon seeing the enormous spider, Tia faints from fright. For the rest of the day, she stays helping Haraku and Lulushi harvest some crops, and Lulushi tried some fresh cabbage leaves, and was also delighted with the flavor. In the afternoon, they finish harvesting many vegetables, and Tia was completely exhausted. So when night comes, they try strawberries for the first time, and this time they are even more satisfied with the flavor. This is enough to convince Tia that farming is much more satisfying than she expected. Lulushi then tells her that it is decided and that she is going to stay with them. So Tia definitely begins to live there with them, helping in the crops, and even in construction, creating stone balance points to lift heavy material. One day, Tia asks Haraku if they can grow many more strawberries, but Haraku explains that even if they expand their farming fields, they will not be able to manage all the crops, as they are already working at full capacity. Furthermore, if they cultivate too much, maybe they will not be able to finish eating everything they harvest. And as they walked, they find more puppies, as the children of Kyo and Yuki had their own children, forming a large family of dogs. And since the hut will not be big enough, Haraku decides to build an area for dogs next to the orchard. In the meantime, several of Zabuton's children also set off on a journey, so that only a few of them remain. Tia also decides to leave, making it clear that she will not be away for long, and leaves the place without further ado. Days later, she returns with 7 girls, explaining that all are high elves who lived in a village to the north, but most of their people were wiped out after they were dragged into a human war. And then their race scattered, and now they wander the land looking for a place to settle down and call home. For this reason, Tia asks Hiraku to allow them to live with them too, promising that they are very hard workers. Lululushi tells her that this is a good idea, since the High Elves are a very talented race and all are very young, and one of the elves says she is the oldest of the group, being a little over 400 years old. The youngest elf says she is about 300 years old. Hiraku allows them to stay there, but says that they need to get along with all the frontline companions who already live there. The girls are very happy with this, and make it clear that they have no problem with that at all, but they also faint when they see that the companions are Zabuton and the dogs. For days, they work on building a new and larger place, since all 7 wanted to live together. Fortunately, all of them know more about construction than Hiraku himself, and in the progress of the construction, the girls are surprised to see that Hiraku could cut giant trees without any effort. Thus, they continued working together, and Hiraku learned a lot from the girls, advancing more and more in the construction. Thus, after 10 days, they managed to build a much larger and better house than Hiraku's small hut. Hiraku felt a little envious of their house, but he was happy to now know the techniques of the High Elves and be able to rebuild his own hut. After the girls settled into their new house, they spend their days helping in the fields. They tell Hiraku that as thanks for letting them live there, they plan to carry out mining and blacksmithing for him, saying that they are very good at it, revealing that they learned many things in all their long years spent wandering around the world. And to start, they would like to build a furnace to smelt iron. In a short time, the girls quickly set up a blacksmith tent and make some very useful things for their stay there. Soon they notice the wheat field and the bread using their own oven, which makes Hiraku very excited. While they are eating bread, Hiraku suddenly remembers something, and although it is a bit late, he asks Lululushi if the land they are on belongs to anyone. She answers no, but that technically the forest is under the control of the Demon King. Hiraku becomes terrified to hear this, but Lululushi clarifies that, as long as he has not received any support to build this, there is nothing he should worry about, and since Hiraku built everything himself, without any help, nothing belongs to him, and that is how it works in the Demon Kingdom. So everyone continues to live peacefully in the forest, and the girls start commenting among themselves how Hiraku is amazing, as he not only tamed all those inferno hounds, but also tamed a demon spider, and he has no idea that these creatures are extremely dangerous. One day Hiraku finds a giant queen bee that Zabuton captured. Zabuton's goal was for Hiraku to adopt her, and although the bee seems dangerous to him, this creature refuses to attack because of the fear she has of Zabuton. Thus Hiraku keeps the bee and builds a small house for her nest near the orchard. Unlike the queen bee, the worker bees are normal-sized and manage to build a large nest inside the house in just 10 days. Hiraku also builds a huge lake for when he brings the water from the river through the canal, although he still has to build it, and since using wood in the canal would cause many leaks, Hiraku uses his almighty farming tool to compact the soil perfectly, creating a material as hard as concrete. From the dirt left over from digging the pond, Hiraku makes enough pieces to build the canal. And with the help of the elves, he works hard to build the canal and quickly in record time. They have a water connection from the river to the pond. Hiraku is also happy to see that even fish are coming into the pond, as they had not managed to get any before. Lululushi gets a bit worried when she sees Hiraku alone cooking the fish from the forest of death, as she has no idea if these creatures are safe to eat. So they let Hiraku try them first to see if it is safe. Hiraku tastes the fish and quickly realizes that it tastes a bit like salmon. Then he offers it to the girls, and in the end, as everyone loved it, Hiraku preserved the other fish they caught with salt to keep them stored. And since now they have a waterway built, Hiraku tells the girls that his next target is rice. He quickly builds the farming fields, filling them with water, and all the girls help him plant the rice, while Zabuton's children take care of keeping pests out of the area. The plants grow much faster than Hiraku imagined, so he quickly harvests the rice and leaves it to dry in the sun. When the rice loses all moisture, he begins to husk it, and then grinds away the leaves and plant material. After a long process, the grains of rice are finally ready. Then Hiraku cooks them and makes rice balls stuffed with fish, which he cooked earlier. These rice balls are such a success with all the girls that they even forget to leave some for Hiraku to eat. They continue to work the rice fields in the following days. And since the work always ended with everyone dirty with mud, Hiraku decides to build a place where everyone can take a hot bath. Construction began immediately, and in a short time they built ovens to heat the water. Soon after, they built a nice washing area and a very large bathtub with a solution for wastewater. And Tia recommended the use of slimes to handle the disposal of dirty water, as these creatures feed on waste and dead organic matter. She says they can purify all the water to release it back into the soil, slimes being practically nature's cleaning machine. Thus, Tia brings several slimes, and Hiraku throws them into a purification pool that was built for the sewage slimes, thus solving the sewage problem. And while Hiraku was collecting firewood, he notices a small fungus on a piece of wood, and since he does not know how to differentiate the fungi of that world, he does not know if he can eat them or not. And it is at this moment that he has a brilliant idea. And on 2 pieces of wood, he uses his almighty tool to cultivate the mushrooms he knows. When he finishes doing that, he finally decides to try out the bath he built. And after showing the girls how everything works, he finally gets into the bathtub after a long time without taking a bath like that. As it happens, in his other life, he could not take a bath while he was hospitalized. Thus, upon entering the hot water, he will be in a great state of relaxation and completely happy. However, his relaxation is interrupted when the other girls enter the bathtub, and he cannot relax as he expected. And although he proposed the idea of building a bathtub just for men, the ladies refused the idea of him having a whole bathtub just for himself. A day later, Hiraku discovers that his mushroom cultivation was a success and decides to make a stew. But before that, the dogs get his attention, as they discovered another group of elves and brought them to his property. Rhea explains that they lived in the same village and that all were about 200 years old. Hiraku also accepts that they live there, and so everyone decides to start building an even larger bathtub. On the other hand, we are shown the story of the first dogs that Hiraku adopted. They were a beautiful couple of wolves that were attacked during the time they were in the forest. And although Yuki was pregnant, they were attacked by the so-called grappler bear, the king of the forest. By pure luck, it did not eat them, but they were severely injured and therefore could not hunt. They were so weakened that even their former prey helped them, and before they realized it, both reached the center of the forest, in a place where not even the grappler bear dared to step. It was there that they found Hiraku, and they had no idea how a human of such weak appearance could survive alone in that forest. But Kuro realized that it was all because of Hiraku's tool, as he could feel an unlimited power coming from this tool. And despite having thought that their lives had already ended, Hiraku shared his food with them and took care of them. After their puppies were born, none of them wanted to fight him, and both decided that Hiraku would be their master. After living with him for so long, they realized that he is more than the weak human they thought he was, and their only concern is that Hiraku does not seem to understand or have any idea that they are not mere dog, but rather terrifying monsters known as inferno hounds. Still, Kuro is very grateful that his good luck brought him to meet Hiraku. After several days, a new house is finally ready, being much larger than all the previous ones, even having a basement included, perfect for storing food and firewood. After cleaning every corner of his new house, Hiraku decides to carve 2 wooden statues of his dogs to place at the entrance of the house. When everyone is settled in the new house, Hiraku tries to prepare a new dish that they have not yet tried. So he decides to make curry, something the girls had never heard of before. And with the help of Tia and Lululushi, Hiraku collects the spices necessary to make curry, when he finishes harvesting what he needed. However, he realizes that the girls disappeared, so he returns home and only the girl helps him cook. And she explains that Lululushi and the other girls are busy with an investigation. While the two cook, the aroma of the food ends up attracting the other girls, and even the dogs that were just watching. At night when the girls return, the curry is finally ready, so everyone gathers to eat. And as expected, everyone liked it so much that once again they ate everything and left nothing behind. A day later, everyone begins to prepare for the approaching winter, as they will spend most of the time indoors. Thus, Hiraku takes charge of storing enough firewood in the basement, and asks the spider for extra blankets in advance. And while the elves work in the forge and on other projects, Tia and Lululushi take charge of preserving some food for the winter. And since the dogs cannot hunt very well during the winter, it will be necessary to store as much meat as possible. Hiraku also creates a snow storage to preserve the vegetables for the winter. And when Hiraku sees the ladies using magic to work, He thinks about how he can use magic, although that is something that only he cannot do. At night, he talks to Lululushi, who explains that he cannot use magic without studying it, even if it is basic magic. Haraku admits that he saw magic being used so easily that he thought he could too, but no matter how many times he tried, he never succeeded. However, Haraku expresses how happy he is to have their help, as they are amazing, and everything he has done is take care of the garden and cook. Upon hearing this, Lululushi makes him feel better, saying that he is actually more amazing than everyone, for no one could live in this forest for as long as he has, which makes him the first human being who succeeded, especially considering that human beings are weak. When winter comes, Haraku carves some board games out of wood, as they need entertainment when they stay indoors. After explaining the rules of several games, most of the girls start playing, showing their competitive side, and even Kuro helps him in some games and plays a chess match against Yuki. Haraku is surprised by the fact that the dogs understand each other's rules, and although he finds it cute at first glance, he feels a terrifying energy coming from them. Even Lululushi tries to play against the dogs, but she ends up suffering an overwhelming defeat. Haraku also tries to play against the girls, trying to take revenge for Lululushi, but just like her, he ends up being completely defeated. So he decides to play another mini-game, which he had also built, but even in this game the girls defeat him. Thus they spend time together in a very warm environment and play all day long. The days pass faster than they expected, as the snow soon melts and spring arrives again, and when the weather becomes warmer, Haraku leaves the house to give some potatoes to Zabuton. But before they can do anything, they hear an alarm, and thanks to the number of beats, Haraku manages to locate the direction from which the intruder is approaching. Then they look in that direction and see a huge creature approaching at high speed. Haraku asks what that is, and Tia clarifies very anxiously, saying that it is a wyvern. The beast prepares to attack, so Tia and Lululushi create a magical defense. Both manage to create a huge barrier that protects the entire place, including the big tree. Even so, several pieces of unburned debris fall near the farming fields, and then the elves do their best to put out the fire. Tia asks if they should attack, but Lululushi admits she is not sure if they can break through this creature's barrier, but they also cannot escape as the beast will follow them. Haraku despairs, not knowing what to do, and the same happens with the girls, as the threatening lower dragon begins to advance in their direction. In the midst of despair, Haraku tells himself that the most important thing is to protect everyone, and upon thinking this, he ends up transforming his farming tool into a powerful spear. And despite not understanding what is happening, Haraku loses no time and decides to use his spear against the creature. The beast creates 3 protective barriers against Haraku, but Haraku's spear breaks through all of them and hits one of the dragon's wings. The spear is returned to Haraku's hand, who without hesitating throws it again with great force, and this time he pierces the creature's chest, knocking it down into the forest. When everything was over, the girls were left speechless, being completely shocked, and then they decide to go see the carcass of this creature in the forest. Upon finding it, Haraku asks if there are many beasts like this around here, and Lululushi responds that there are, but only in the places where they live, and that it is rare to find one so large in the forest. Haraku, with a serious look, asks if there is any possibility that someone sent this creature to attack them. But Tia tells him that this is unlikely, because even if the creature were under someone's command, that person would not send such a rare and valuable creature just to check something in the forest. So it is more likely that it was a wild creature acting alone. And Haraku comes to the conclusion that it was nothing more than a fortunate and rare incident. And despite having created a somewhat tense atmosphere, all of Haraku's seriousness disappears when he asks if they can eat this beast. A short time later, they return home and prepare to eat this creature, while Tia explains that the meat of this monster is actually considered a delicacy. Haraku prepares a grilled steak, steamed meatballs, and even a vegetable stew made with meat from the animal's tail. To everyone's surprise, the meat ends up being very tender and full of flavor, so that everyone is satisfied with the meal. During dinner, Lululushi discreetly asks Tia if she would have been able to block an attack from the spear that Haraku used earlier, but she responds that not even a Dragon King could block that attack. After all, with just a single throw of a spear, he broke through 3 layers of a lower dragon's barrier and then pierced its chest. So the girls come to the conclusion that they were very lucky that the dogs were the first enemies they encountered when they arrived in the forest. Just imagine being hit by a strike from Haraku, who cuts down trees with a single blow and eliminates intelligent creatures that use barriers to protect themselves. Any fight against him would be instant death. On the other side of the screen, we are shown the Demon King's castle in the Demon Realm. There we see 3 of the Demon King's 4 heavenly generals, and they discuss the report they received about a dragon having been slain. None of them can believe that such a beast was defeated, because if a single dragon approached them, they would have to mobilize all their military forces to fight. One of them explains that according to the report, the dragon was actually a lower dragon, which was attacked from the ground and killed with 2 shots. Upon hearing this, the other 2 generals become incredulous, even panicking at the information. They say they have no power to fight against something like that. But then Randon, the calmest man of the 3, declares that before fear and panic begin to set in among the citizens, the 4 generals must deal with the situation. However, Glatz proposes as a solution his resignation and abandons his position without hesitating. Elsewhere, we are also shown a huge building, where a dragon named Dryam talks to his servant named Gucci, and after seeing that creature being defeated in midair, Dryam asks Gucci what he thinks would happen if he were attacked in that manner. And Gucci does not hesitate to say that that attack would probably eliminate him in the blink of an eye, so it would be foolish to attack that place. The news about the dragon that was defeated causes panic in several other places, and the next day Haraku calmly wonders what will pair best with the dragon meat, and decides to make wine with the grapes he has. One of the girls is very excited to help him, since apparently the wine that exists in this world is something very precious that not just anyone can have. After harvesting many grapes, the girls crush them in something that Haraku built specifically for this purpose. And meanwhile Haraku was in charge of replacing the barrels as they filled up. The barrels were built by the elf who knows how to make airtight containers. Her name is completely unknown to me, because there are so many elves that I avoided memorizing their names. Please accept my sincere apology. The girls start treading on the grapes, but Tia ends up slipping, so the elves propose that they sing a song that they loved in their village while working together. This helps them synchronize, and they have more fun this way, so much so that Lululushi joins them, taking Haraku with her. After much work and fun, at dusk they finally finish with 16 barrels in total. Meanwhile, the god of the world observes them, and shows the goddess of agriculture how much Haraku is enjoying himself, and asks her to forgive him. However, the goddess of agriculture gets furious and refuses to forgive the god, because he mistakenly punished the soul of an innocent human, and then threw him into the most dangerous forest to pretend that he had done nothing. Furthermore, he gave him a replica of the sacred farming spear. The god tries to apologize, saying that for now Haraku uses it only as a farming tool, but the goddess says to never give such a weapon to a human. More annoyed than before, she tells the god that this spear should negate all magic and ability from Haraku, and drain all his vitality with use. Even so, the god says that Haraku is fine, thanks to the super fast recovery abilities, and the healthy body that he gave him. Despite this, the goddess exclaims to the god that as punishment, he will have to sit in a fixed place for 300 years. Back to Haraku. After Zabuton sounds the alarm, he finds another small vampire girl in the forest. Lululushi is surprised upon seeing her and recognizes her as her cousin. And after hearing that the infamous Angel of Annihilation was pursuing Lululushi, she decided to follow her there, but Haraku tells her that the angel had already found Lululushi before her, and that she could relax and stay with them for a while. Flora looks at him and comments that she finds it hard to believe that he is her cousin's husband, as something in this story does not align with reality. But when she feels her cousin's cold glare, Flora takes back everything she said, and Lululushi makes it clear to her that Haraku is in charge of this place, and that he is the master of all those inferno hounds that she saw, in addition to the fact that he defeated a dragon by himself. Flora then understands everything quickly and apologizes for her rude behavior, and Haraku asks her not to worry. But changing the subject, Haraku turns to Kuro and asks if they really are wolves. In response, Kuro barks at him, and Haraku also asks him what the inferno part means. Kuro then begins to release a massive red flame from his snout, yet Haraku simply claps his hands as if the inferno hound had merely performed a parlor trick. Lululushi, witnessing this display, remains in utter disbelief that Haraku has lived alongside these creatures for so long without realizing their true, terrifying nature. After all, inferno hounds are infamous magical beasts known throughout the world. That evening, Haraku prepares a lavish dinner for Flora as an apology for the scare Kuro and the other hounds gave her. As expected, she is utterly captivated by the meal, much like Lululushi was when she first arrived, and immediately begins jotting down detailed notes for her research. After staying for a few days, Flora departs in a flurry of excitement to make preparations for her cousin's wedding. A month later, she returns accompanied by a contingent of maids belonging to the ogre race. Their representative introduces herself as Anne, pledging that the maids will serve Hiraku and fulfill his every wish. Hiraku gently clarifies that such formality is unnecessary and inquires about the livestock they brought with them. Flora explains that they are standard cattle, noting she made a point to select cows capable of producing milk. Hiraku's eyes light up at the news, realizing they can now make butter and cheese. As daily life continues, Tia notices that multiple races are now residing in the settlement in large numbers. While she remains the sole representative of the angel race, feeling somewhat disheartened, she approaches Hiraku to inform him that she will be taking her leave for a short time. Before long, Tia returns alongside 3 heavily armored angels bearing formidable weaponry. She also brings a group of lizardmen led by a representative named Daga, who presents a single chicken inside a cage. Somewhat suspicious, Hiraku asks if the chicken breathes fire, but Tia reassures him that it is an ordinary chicken meant solely for laying eggs. Hiraku expresses deep gratitude, noting that fresh eggs are essential for baking cakes, a revelation that brings immense joy to the women. Thanks to everyone's combined efforts, the settlement grows significantly more civilized. The ogre maids, being seasoned professionals, take full charge of house cleaning and maintaining the living spaces. While they also handle the cooking, their repertoire is initially limited to basic fare. Hiraku personally instructs them in the culinary techniques he knows. The maids eagerly absorb the knowledge and quickly master the preparation of far more sophisticated dishes. Meanwhile, the 3 newly arrived angels assume responsibility for patrolling various sectors of the forest, maintaining a vigilant watch over even the subtle movements in the area. This security measure was instituted by Tia, who felt that Hiraku should not have to bear the sole burden of defending the village after the wyvern incident. Simultaneously, the lizardmen take on tasks requiring immense physical strength, accelerating the village's development at an unprecedented pace. Looking around at the bustling community, Hiraku realizes the population has grown beyond his ability to easily keep count. It is at this moment he is informed that yet another group of high elf women has arrived to settle down. Observing the absence of men among them once again, Hiraku asks if any male elves accompanied them. They explain that no males survived, but assure him that male elves may eventually appear in time. Without pressing further, Hiraku simply wishes them luck, deciding it best not to inquire how they plan to make that happen. A few days later, Hiraku gathers the representatives of all the resident races. He expresses his desire to give a proper name to their settlement, reflecting on how it grew from a solitary hut with a few farming plots into a collection of homes housing a diverse community. Since it has officially become a village, it requires an identity. The head of the ogre maids suggests naming the village after the forest itself. Hiraku considers this until he learns its official designation, the Forest of Death, and promptly rejects the proposal to avoid giving their home a grim reputation. Another resident suggests City of Death, which sounds even more ominous and is immediately set aside. Finally, Zabuton raises a leg and points toward a specific landmark. Hiraku follows her gesture and gazes upon the massive tree that has stood there since the very beginning, the tree that provided him shelter and served as his guiding landmark when he first arrived. Inspired, he officially names the settlement Teju Village Big Tree Village. That evening, Hiraku announces the official name to all the villagers during a grand festival held to celebrate their very first batch of home-brewed wine. The entire village erupts in celebration, joyfully raising their glasses and officially addressing Hiraku as their village chief. However, Hiraku humbly insists that their leadership structure was a collective decision made by everyone over time. Nevertheless, Lulushi firmly reminds him that only he possesses the vision and authority to serve as village chief, a sentiment unanimously endorsed by every resident present. Embracing the role with genuine joy, Hiraku resolves to devote his full effort to guiding and building Teju Village. With the settlement continuing its rapid development, Hiraku carries out his day-to-day duties as village chief without changing his modest routine. One afternoon, Zabuton's web alarm triggers, and a patrolling angel quickly arrives to report the approach of an envoy from the Demon King's realm. Flanked by Lulushi and Tia, Hiraku goes to meet the messenger, a dragon newt named Bezel, who introduces himself and requests an audience with the leader of the territory. When Hiraku steps forward as village chief, Bezel presents a commemorative gift to mark their meeting. He then delivers an official message from the Demon King, who wishes to clarify the legal status and ownership of the lands Hiraku has developed within demon territory. Recalling Lululushi's earlier explanation regarding territorial law, Hiraku assumes the Demon Kingdom expects tax payments for their occupation of the forest, summoning his courage to act as a proper chief. Hiraku proposes a deal. If the Demon King grants them formal permission to reside on the land, Teju village will pay an annual tax of 10% of their total crop harvest. Bezel is visibly taken aback by the proposal, causing Hiraku to briefly worry that his offer might be insultingly low. To his surprise, Bezel simply asks if he is entirely certain about those terms. Hiraku confirms the arrangement, specifying that the Demon Kingdom's representatives may collect the tax each year prior to the winter season. Bezel agrees without hesitation, finalizing the treaty far faster than Hiraku had anticipated. The official document signed by Hiraku stipulates that the 10% tax applies exclusively to agricultural crops cultivated in the fields. It explicitly excludes secondary products such as milk, eggs, honey, or alcohol. Furthermore, any additional goods desired by the Demon Kingdom must be acquired through legitimate commercial trade. Concerned that his negotiation tactics might have seemed overly stern, Hiraku presents Bezel with a parting gift of fresh produce. Lulushi commends his diplomatic tact. By establishing a formal tax obligation, Teju village is now officially under the legal protection of the Demon King. Tia notes the astonishing nature of the agreement, pointing out that standard territorial taxes typically range between 50% and 60%. Anne adds that securing an annual tax inspection was a brilliant strategic move. It forces the Demon Kingdom to officially recognize their residency right, while an annual collection schedule makes it impossible for royal officials to accurately measure their true total yield, effectively granting them royal protection at an actual rate far below 10%. Meanwhile, Lulushi celebrates the encounter for another reason. Bezel's introductory gift was a rare panacea, an all-healing medicine capable of curing severe afflictions when applied directly to a wound. Back at the Demon King's castle, the four heavenly generals gather as Bezel presents his report. The generals are stunned that the inhabitants of Teju village voluntarily submitted to their sovereignty despite possessing the military capability to slay a dragon. General Randon expresses deep skepticism, suspecting a hidden political motive. Bezel explains that he had no room to maneuver during negotiations, as he found himself standing directly before the legendary vampire sage, Lulushi, and the feared angel of annihilation, Tia. The generals are thrown into sheer panic at the revelation. Bezel further reveals that the village is defended by an army of high elves, a pack of inferno hounds, and that his escort to the village chief consisted of a trio of dread-inducing executioner angels. Under such overwhelming pressure, accepting the village chief's voluntary offer of vassalage was the only way to prevent Teju village from declaring open hostility against the Demon Kingdom. As the generals tremble in fear, their attention turns to the box of parting gifts Hiraku sent. Upon opening it, they discover a stash of extraordinarily high-quality apples, a fruit none of them have ever tasted before. Their anxiety briefly yields to awe at the incredible flavor. However, Bezel notices the cloth wrapping the fruit and pales in terror. It is woven from the silk of a demon spider, a legendary calamity that past demon kings struggled to suppress. Overcome by the absurd reality of the situation, General Glatz abruptly stands up and announces his immediate resignation once again. Shortly after, the settlement receives another unexpected visit, this time from none other than the true ruler of the dragons himself, Harem. The mighty dragon lowers his head in a gesture of profound respect, while his attendant, Gucci, presents Hiraku with a lavish, exquisitely crafted sword as a greeting gift. Hiraku expresses his gratitude for the magnificent blade, but politely asks the reason for their visit. Gucci explains that his master's lair lies to the south, and that, despite the distance, they consider Teju village to be their neighbors, making this a formal courtesy call to foster good relations. Hiraku warmly invites them inside. The massive dragon assumes human form, though he initially appears somewhat nervous. However, once inside, Harem relaxes completely, expressing great admiration for the village and thoroughly enjoying the local alcohol, going so far as to declare his intention to move in permanently. Gucci promptly reins him in, reminding his master that leaving his lair unguarded would spark utter chaos among his subordinates. Upon taking their leave, the dragons are given a generous parting gift of fresh apples by Hiraku. The encounter prompts Hiraku to contemplate how Teju village should handle future visitors. Recognizing that hosting guests in his personal residence is impractical, he decides to construct a dedicated guest house. The High Elves build a spacious lodge capable of accommodating up to 30 people to comfortably house larger delegations. To ensure safety without causing undue panic to peaceful travelers, the elves craft a special bell for Zabuton to ring, signaling whether an incoming presence is a friendly guest or a hostile threat. Additionally, a reception team is established to monitor incoming groups and guard against potential infiltrators posing as diplomats. Flora volunteers to oversee nighttime security at the guest house, leveraging her vampiric physiology to remain vigilant for days without sleep. These preparations prove immediately useful when a delegation of beastkin arrives from the Howling Village. Their representative, Garf, explains that their village has faced economic hardship due to unstable trade routes. Having heard rumors of a powerful settlement that secured a direct treaty with the Demon King, they sought out Teju village in hopes of establishing a new commercial partnership. The following day, Garf meets with Hiraku to present their trade proposal. He offers various goods crafted from mined ores, including glasswork, pottery, and decorative pieces in exchange for agricultural produce. Garf eagerly requests as much food as Teju village is willing to spare. Hiraku agrees, officially establishing trade relations between the two communities. To handle the heavy logistics, Hiraku convinces Dryam to transport the bulk goods back and forth in exchange for a large barrel of fine wine. Upon returning from their trading expedition to the Howling Village, the transport team brings a request from the Beastkin village chief. He asks if Teju village would be willing to accept a group of Beastkin women looking to migrate. Since Teju village still requires additional labor to support its expanding fields, Hiraku agrees to welcome around 20 Beastkin women. However, he includes one strict condition: they must send at least 2 young men with the group, as Hiraku is desperate to avoid being the sole adult male in the entire settlement. When the Beastkin migrants arrive days later, Hiraku discovers a severe misunderstanding. The 3 young men sent by the village chief are actually just young children. With no other choice, Hiraku accepts them into the village family regardless. The new residents adapt quickly to village life, though several of the Beastkin women initially faint upon encountering Zabuton and the Inferno Hounds. While observing the newcomers, Hiraku notices one of the Beastkin using magic, triggering the realization that literally every resident in the village, including the wolves and Zabuton, possesses magical capabilities except for him. Seeing his slight dismay, Sina, one of the Beastkin women, attempts to cheer him up by pointing out that the 3 young boys cannot use magic either, as they have yet to learn it. Hiraku mentally notes that even the children will likely surpass him in magic before long, but resolves to focus on what he does best. Suddenly, a loud explosion and violent tremor interrupt his thoughts. A patrolling angel rushes to inform Hiraku that a grappler bear and a bloody viper are locked in a destructive battle in the northern sector of the forest. As the ground shakes with increasing intensity, the angel warns that the clash could eventually threaten the village, making intervention dangerous without a coordinated strategy. Hiraku considers the situation calmly for a few moments before turning to the angel with a single question: whether the 2 battling beasts are edible. When she confirms that both are indeed delicacies, all of Hiraku's apprehension vanishes, as he casually admits he has always wanted to know what bear meat tastes like. Upon arriving at the scene, Hiraku immediately transforms the almighty farming tool into its spear form. Without a moment's hesitation, he hurls the holy spear with devastating precision, instantly obliterating both legendary threats in a single strike before they even realize his presence. Upon returning home, Hiraku prepares a stew with the bear meat and uses wine. He fries the snake meat, which ends up tasting like a moldy shoe. Soon after, a group of elderly men, led by a man named Donovan, arrive as visitors, and that is precisely why they would like him to share a little of his wine with them. In exchange, they can produce alcohol using other products that Hiraku has in his field, since they have spent their entire lives studying alcohol production and possess the necessary technology to do so. This ends up being enough to convince the ladies, and in no time, Donovan and his men begin working immediately on the alcohol production. After the whole process, Donovan gives a bit of freshly distilled corn whiskey to Hiraku, who is surprised to see how strong this drink is. After some time, Donovan and his men end up staying in the village, working as brewers. Then, Hiraku is obligated to throw a party in celebration of the creation of the new alcohol. Even Doram attends and ends up getting drunk as usual. Days later, Zabuton sounds the alarm, and Hiraku prepares to attack with his spear. He quickly sees a hostile-looking dragon approaching rapidly, but before he can do anything, Doram knocks the dragon out of the way. However, a third dragon appears flying directly toward Hiraku, who has no choice but to attack. His first attack narrowly misses, and then he prepares to launch his second attack. But before he can do that, Gucci appears in front of him, exclaiming for him to stop. Right afterward, Doram appears in his human form alongside Grafaloon, who happens to be his wife, and his daughter named Lastismone. It is explained that the fact that Dorame was always sneaking away to go to the Great Tree Village apparently raised suspicions at his home, since he always went to the village with all kinds of valuable gifts, and ended up spending the night sleeping at the inn so as not to return home drunk. When the misunderstanding is cleared up, Dorame's wife and daughter apologize to Hiraku. Shortly after, the dragon daughter is talking about how threatening Hiraku's village is. Dorame's wife comments that she never thought she would meet someone who had enough strength to blow their heads off. And Lastus Moon agrees, since her mother was not even able to defend herself against Hiraku's attack, and had to dodge, and her mother tells her that she was only able to dodge thanks to the spider, who is an old friend of hers. But if the spider had not been pulled out of the way at that moment, she probably would not be alive anymore. And since she cannot ignore this kind of power, Dorame's wife tells Lastus Moon that she will have to live with Hiraku for a while, and this is to ensure that the power of that human never turns against them. Unable to argue, Lastus Moon becomes an inhabitant of the Great Tree Village, as Hiraku has never had any trouble accepting reinforcements in his village. Lastus Moon presents herself somewhat nervously, asking to be called last, and asking what she can do. Before long, she begins working in the village, but due to her monstrous dragon strength, almost everything she does ends up in disaster. But after thinking for a bit, Hiraku manages to find a perfect job for the girl, and leaves Lastus Moon in charge of handling the diplomatic relations of the village. This occurs because everyone is afraid of dragons, whose power, knowledge, and wisdom are incredible. And that is precisely why giving this position to Lastus Moon worked perfectly, because when that servant of the Demon King went to the village to buy oranges, he ended up buying many crops because of Last, as she intimidated him without even trying. Bezel returns to the Demon King's castle, and informs the other generals that the Great Tree Village now has dragons, and because of the military power that is growing in that village, they need to and must keep an eye on them, being careful not to be discovered, or they might consider it an act of aggression. Bezel devises a plan, and soon he decides to let his daughter, Harem, live in the village, to investigate whether the people of the Great Tree intend to take over the world. And although the girl was confident that this would be no big deal, she soon realizes the enormous military power that the village possesses, and abandons all her confidence. Even so, she decides to continue working in the village, and becomes a friend of Lastus Moon in a short time. When autumn arrived, everyone appreciates food more, and on a certain day, after eating a stew with the girls, Hiraku mentions that it would be much better if they could eat seafood. This catches the attention of all the girls, and they soon ask what he means by seafood. And Hiraku explains that he is talking about sea produce like cod, crab, or their mother's whale, because with these and other ingredients, they could make a much better stew. Flora begins to investigate what he said, while Tia wonders if crabs can really be eaten, since they are very hard and wild. And despite all the doubts, excitement gets the better of them, and they mobilize immediately. And the current idea to be put into practice is to go to a port city that exists within the borders of the Demon Kingdom, to the south of the city, where the trade of sea products is done quite frequently, so they could get fish from there. However, it would be necessary to ask for the help of a merchant, and Last offers to take them there, and so the two depart immediately. 3 days later, they return with Michael, the president of the Goron Company. After introducing himself to Hiraku, he shows him all the marine products he brought from the city. The man is quite direct in his visit, and makes it clear that his goal is to suggest more opportunities, saying that his objective is to make their products and do more business with them. Furthermore, he proposes to become the official supplier to the government and distribute the products of the Great Tree Village, which means he wants to handle all their trade with the outside world, as he can obtain much more value by trading the valuable products they produce. Tia and Lelouch take charge of looking at the product list that Michael's company trades, and after discussing several important matters, Michael returns to his hometown, getting a ride from Last. Hiraku comments that Michael seems to be a very skilled negotiator, and that he could really be a great asset in their negotiations, especially if they end up making more profit from the deals. And although he seems to be a very skilled and calm merchant, when he gets far enough away from the village, Michael shows all the fear he was hiding. However, he is very happy to have survived and managed to complete his business with that terrifying group. Even with the fear of returning to that village, he knows he made the deal of a lifetime. After all this, Hiraku and the girls finally try real seafood, which ends up being very good, and Hiraku thinks about asking for shrimp or squid next time. Sometime later, for the third time, a dragon attacks the village, and the squad of 3 angels cannot stop it. so Haraku observes the dragon quite carefully, wondering whether or not it could be related to Dora. But the dragon remains still for a few seconds doing nothing and just looks at Haraku, and then launches a trail of fire into the forest, showing its power and practically challenging him. Haraku then uses his spear, and in a few seconds he brings down the dragon, causing it to fall into the forest. When he goes to investigate, he finds a girl who admits defeat and surrenders nonchalantly. Haraku asks why she burned the forest, but the girl cannot think of any excuse. However, Dorem seems concerned and apologizes to Haraku, explaining that she is Hakuren, his older sister. Hakuren says that all the fault lies with Dorem because he said he would give last to the mayor of this village, and so she decided to attack him, as she wanted to see for herself what kind of person Last would marry. Dorem then shouts, saying that he probably said that when he was drunk, which does not surprise Haraku. Haraku then asks if she could not have visited him normally, but Hakuren replies that she wanted to play a little with him, since everyone talks about how strong he is. In addition, she wanted to vent her frustration a little, as she cannot believe that her niece, being 900 years younger than her, found a husband before her. But Haraku does not want to hear about her frustrations, and scolds her, saying that although she wanted to play, she cannot cause trouble for them and for the people of this village. After being scolded, Hakuren has no choice but to clean up the mess she made. A few days later, Hakuren easily adapts to the village and eats casually with Dorem, as if they were in their own home. Last apologizes for the behavior of her aunt, for this is causing her a lot of trouble, but Haraku assures her not to worry. After eating, Hakuren says that she heard that there are many fun board games in this village, and so she asks Haraku to participate in some games. And of course, Haraku decides to play mahjong, but at the request of all the dragons, they make a bet that the loser will have to take off a piece of clothing as punishment. Upon seeing the dangerous competitiveness of the dragons, Haraku grows concerned and has the feeling that everything will go wrong. Soon after, his concern increases when he realizes that the dragons really hate losing, which leads them to start a very serious game of mahjong. After several games, Haraku's concerns become reality, as he is the only one who lost enough to be left with only one piece of clothing. Unfortunately, he ends up losing the last game and is forced to be naked. Meanwhile, in the Demon King's castle, the generals are also worried, as they received information that the ancient dragon Hakuren was seen in the Great Tree Village. Therefore, now they have enough power to conquer a country. It is asked of the king whether they will stand idly by doing nothing. But Demon King Galgardo is not in the least interested in the matter, and comments to Bezel that his daughter has been in a bad mood lately, since she has not said anything to him all day, other than a good morning. For this reason, he fears she is in her rebellious phase. One of his generals tries to return to the subject and warns him, saying that he needs to focus on preparing their military forces immediately. But when this man tries to talk to Randon, it is discovered that he fled, leaving behind only his half-written resignation letter. On the other hand, after attacking the Great Tree Village, Hakuren decides to stay, and since she is good at it, she ends up becoming the village teacher, teaching reading, writing, and mathematics. One day, some Lamia women visit the village, bringing treasures and asking that their lives be spared. They explain that at some point Kuro's children decided to clear out a dungeon they found in the middle of the forest. The women were forced to flee quickly from their homes. Although the wolves did not know what they were doing, they caused them a lot of trouble, and so Haraku decides to exchange precious gems that the Lamias extracted for some of his crops. Haraku tells them that he would like to continue trading with them, and very happy with all this, the girls returned to their original homes. After that, the Lamias formed a delivery service and began transporting the village's commercial products, becoming reliable neighbors, and with that, the increase in trade with other cities and areas ends up reaching a whole new level. So Haraku decides to plant even more things. On the other hand, in a castle, the women talk about the military power that the people of the Great Tree are accumulating, believing that the people of the Great Tree Village are planning something very bad. They say that they are probably convincing Frem to stay there so that they can use her as a hostage. Therefore, these three filthy people ask the princess to start gathering her troops immediately, before it is too late. The princess agrees, saying that they must defeat those filthy ones and save Frem. Meanwhile, Freyr was working in her office, since she became the person in charge of the village's accounts. Her father visits her and soon after informs her that the Demon King's daughter, Princess Yuri, is gathering troops and preparing for a military campaign. Freyr is surprised and asks why the princess would do such an absurd thing. And Bezel explains that since she left, some of her followers took advantage of the situation to fill the princess's head with half-truths. And by followers, he really means the three daughters of very important people, who according to Freyr, must form that trio of politically powerful idiots. Bezel reveals that the location they plan to attack is the Great Tree Village, and Freyr gets angry, saying that they should know how ridiculously powerful this village is. After all, she sent several reports. However, her father explains that the reports seemed so ridiculous that they were starting to look unrealistic. And although he tried to get the Demon King to stop all this, he is very soft on his daughter, so he did nothing. Bezel says that the princess's troops will mobilize the following day, and her forces count 300 men. He makes it clear to Freyr that she cannot stop the princess alone, because if she does that, she will be considered an enemy of the Demon Kingdom. Therefore, it is better for them to ask someone from the village to defeat the princess's forces, because that way they will give up and return home. However, they also cannot let everyone know about this situation, for all of this could end up with the Demon Kingdom being destroyed. So, basically, Freyr has to show the troops the differences between what to avoid without actually mobilizing the people's forces. Therefore, on the following day, the maidens take it upon themselves to demonstrate their monstrous strength to the princess's soldiers, creating chaos effortlessly. In seconds, absolutely all the soldiers surrender terrified, begging for their lives to be spared. After witnessing this, the three girls who started everything appear in the village. There, Freyr explains to Hiraku that they should live in the village, and she does this in a threatening manner. And the girls say they would do anything to live, saying that they will work as if their lives depended on it. In addition to the three girls, Princess Yuri also appears, but Freyr omits the fact that she is the Demon King's daughter, and does not tell Hiraku, saying that she is not someone who needs special treatment, and that she should be put to work while she is here. Hiraku then asks Freyr to show her the village, and when he leaves her alone, Freyr warns that if they work honestly, their initial attack on the village will be forgiven. And after showing the surroundings, a pair of noble maidens speak about how ridiculous it is for people as important as them to have to stay in a place that is in the middle of nowhere. Then, during the night, the three try to escape, but they faint from fear upon seeing the infernal wolves and one of Zabuton's children, and after several frustrated attempts, they give up completely and help Freyr with the mountain of paperwork that she has to do, becoming the ladies of the village hall. Meanwhile, after getting to know the village well for a few days, Princess Yuri becomes very anxious, saying that she cannot believe that such a world exists outside the Demon Kingdom. She admits that she has always been very ignorant about the outside world, reaching the point of trying to bring war and conflict to such a peaceful and wonderful people. For several days, the princess and the ladies of the town council spent most of their time helping to cultivate the plants and working in the village's activities, socializing with the children and the villagers. After some time, Princess Yuri finally leaves, saying that she learned a lot during the day, for which she is very grateful. On the other hand, the ladies of the town council stay behind, because after so much time they became enchanted with the village's food and with the other benefits they have, so they decide to stay, with the excuse that they have many things to learn and still have a lot of work to do. After Yuri's departure, the time for the pre-winter harvests finally arrived, and as a result, they gathered so many things that the vegetables did not even fit in the storehouse. Because of this, Last asks if she can take some harvests to her father, to which Hiraku agrees, without any problem. Hakurin then asks if she can also take some harvests to her father, but out of pure curiosity, he asks who her parents are. Then they discover that Hakurin's parents are the feared dragons that live separately in the north and in the south, known as being both the Emperor Dragons of the North and the South. Hakurin departs to take the harvests to her parents, while Last takes them to hers. After that, Last heads to the city to drop off the harvests that will be sent there. While there, she receives a request to exterminate a monster that is troubling the local trade. The monster turns out to be a type of fish that Hiraku had mentioned before. So Last gets excited and defeats the monster with ease, and later brings Hiraku some meat from this creature, which was given to her as thanks for defeating the monster. On the other hand, when Hakurin returns, she brings a group of mountain elves who wanted to move to this village. The group's leader explains that they normally live in the mountains, but lately have been having difficulty finding food. Hiraku does not need to hear anything else and immediately thinks of a plan to see where they can stay while building their future home. This makes the group of mountain elves very happy, and in a short time, they officially become residents of the village. Thus time passes, and gradually autumn disappears as winter approaches. Then one day Hiraku goes to Lelouch's room, since apparently she had not been feeling well for a while and was bedridden. Tia and Sina check on her, but after asking a few questions and hearing her symptoms, they come to the conclusion that Lelouch is pregnant. This surprises both her and Hiraku. Everyone in the village becomes very happy when they hear about her pregnancy, while she ends up being the calmest about it. Hiraku ends up worrying about her every day, although Lelouch assures him that she is fine. Then Hiraku returns to his routine, taking care to keep things inside the house in order and protecting the crops from pests and none of the normal garden pests that he knows exist in this world. Instead, there are strange black things that live on the plants and eat their leaves. Fortunately, the children of Zabuton or Kiro and the others easily detect them, so these little things did not cause any real damage, since the way to get rid of these things is simply to use the almighty farming tool as a watering can, which apparently has the power to eliminate garden pests. The fields were expanded and became quite large, so now it is easier to control them. Even so, Hiraku is very happy to see all the crops progressing, and the animals too. After all, the cows gave birth to calves. Hiraku then makes an effort to improve the village and even builds a plot of beautiful flowers for decoration. In addition to agricultural work, he also takes care of all kinds of things that the residents ask of him, including toys for children, which is easy for him to do due to his farming tool, although he has no experience in construction. From time to time, they all participate in battle training, in case one day they need to fight. And after a certain day, Hiraku receives the news that there was a strange man in the village, and when he goes to investigate, he finds a strange man, prostrated, before the statue of the god of the world. Right after, they discover that this man's name is Valgreed, and he is the progenitor of the vampires and, technically, is Lelouch and Flora's grandfather. He explains that upon hearing that Lelouch was pregnant, he was sure that there must be some mistake. But when he saw her, he realized that it was true, and he was only surprised because it seems that vampires tend to continue their bloodline by forming new blood pact, and that having a child rarely happens. Even so, Valgreed is happy and says that children are a treasure. The man then apologizes for entering the village without greeting him, and explains that at first he was only planning to take a look and then leave, but he was drawn to the statue under the great tree, as it is a splendid portrayal of the great creator. Hiraku then asks him if he had ever met God, and Valgreed replied that yes, only once, when he was born. He remembers that God told him to work hard, despite the fact that he would be born with a body completely above normal. Valgreed explains that he remembers God, but for some reason he cannot remember his exact appearance, and even after trying countless times, he was never able to create something so close to him. But Hiraku managed to do it, and as excited as the man is, Hiraku makes it clear to him that the statue belongs to the village, so he cannot offer it to him. Valgreed becomes visibly disheartened, but Hiraku then decides to carve another statue for him, making him very happy. Shortly after, Valgreed thanks him for making a statue, and asks Hiraku to take care of Lelouch. Hiraku comments that in the end, Valgreed turned out to be a very easy person to deal with. However, Flora says that this should not be the case, as he is an incredibly important high-ranking person in the church, something that Hiraku did not know. Valgreed, for his part, returns to the temple after 50 years, saying that he wishes to place the statue that Hiraku made in the best place. The elder in charge of the temple becomes fascinated upon seeing the statue, saying that they must make sure everyone knows about the sculptor. However, Valgreed replies that this is not a good idea, as Hiraku does not seem to be the type of person who likes to gain fame by making statues, and he does not intend to do anything that would disturb Hiraku's peaceful life. Even so, he makes sure that they can support him quietly, and then he orders the elder to communicate to all the other temples the order that they show the utmost respect to the people of the Great Tree. After some time, Valgreed sends a luxurious piano to Hiraku. However, Hiraku refuses to accept it as payment for the statue. So, Valgreed says it is a gift to celebrate Lelouch's pregnancy. The piano is placed in Hiraku's dining room, and a short time later, they bring another one for practice, at the request of the ladies of the town council, who did not dare to touch the more elegant piano, because they were afraid to play it. The pianos were a success, as everyone wanted to play, although the only ones who could play well were Frame and the girls from the Demon Kingdom. But even so, everyone else made sure to practice, and they kept improving. And continuing the story, we see the dragoness Lastismun, who is in charge of diplomatic relations in the Great Tree Village. She is accompanied by Frau, the daughter of the noble, and they show us a small tour around the Great Tree Village. That very village which started out as something extremely simple and small, and now one cannot even see where the cultivated farming fields end. In charge of the tomatoes, we find Sina and the rest of the living legends, the High Elves. The Mountain Elves are in charge of manufacturing various items. They are the ones who end up handling all this carpentry work, and the Dwarves are in charge of producing the alcoholic beverages. In the nursery, Harem continues working, while the administration of the village is being carried out by Lelouch, Tia, and Rhea. It is then that we see that Frau is the one making a video presentation for the village. And when it comes to Hiraku's turn, he introduces himself as the village chief. Currently, the Great Tree Village is very active because the residents are expecting 100 more new residents. Hiraku proposes designating a new area for all the new residents, and for that reason, it is time to start felling the trees. The lizardmen end up getting motivated, and since a lot of food is needed, Kiro and his offspring will be in charge of the hunting duties. The residents are very anxious and nervous about welcoming the new resident, and for this reason, they are practicing a lot. A little later, to relax a bit, they give some new sandwiches to Hiraku. He is surprised to see the dedication in their preparation, and as he takes his first bites of the sandwich, he mentions that they are very good to eat while working. And since Frau is currently very busy, Hiraku decides to bring some sandwiches to her. Upon reaching the girls, we see that they are going through a very difficult time. Rosalind, Roju, and ER complain quite a bit, since this mountain of paperwork never ends. We then see Harem, Lastismun, and Flora trying to help the girls, although Harem is worsening things rather than helping, since she keeps tickling Lastismun, and in this way, she ends up sneezing and destroying everything with her breath. Hiraku tries to calm the girls down, letting them know that Frau will bring help for them, and precisely at that moment, Frau appears with the new recruits. They came directly from the Demon Kingdom, having gone there because it would supposedly help their social status. Frau warns them that it is time to work, and quickly the new recruits begin with the proper procedures, rapidly organizing the administrative team of the place. But when they meet Zabuton and Kiro, they almost have a heart attack from the fright. A little later, Gromeria meets with Hiraku and informs him that she has already inspected the new area where the new residents will stay, and she found no danger whatsoever. Just then, he arrives and lets Hiraku know that she was the one who sent Gromeria, and that it is time to go inspect the zone they will give to the new residents. Hiraku asks if he should prepare some food for the journey, but Hia tells him not to worry about that, because it is not that far away. She reveals that the new location for the new village is in the lower part of the river, because that will give them an advantage. Hiraku asks what that advantage is, and Hia reveals that it is to guarantee their own safety in the worst-case scenario. And Hiraku asks what the worst-case scenario would be, and she answers that it would be a rebellion, so it is better to be safe than sorry. Upon arriving at the place, Hiraku is surprised to see that this location also has a huge tree, and once the reconnaissance is done, the lizardmen and the mountain elves begin advancing to clear the entire forest towards the village to construct a new path. But they are not Hiraku. No matter how hard they try, they cannot cut down the trees with ease, and for that reason in the end they end up asking the man for help. So all the heavy work of felling the trees ends up falling on him, and with his almighty farming tool he manages to build a path, and they take advantage of the logs to create an improvised bridge, since according to Heya, if they made a much larger bridge, larger monsters could use it to cross over. Right after that, Hiraku takes care of clearing the surroundings of the second big tree, and constructing the canal that leads the water from the river towards the new village. Daga tells him that they have advanced a lot in a short time, but that it is time for his chief to rest a little, because he practically did everything by himself. Hiraku ends up accepting, and the lizardmen take charge of the construction of the village. But since Hiraku cannot stay idle, he takes advantage of his free time to craft a statue of Zabuton. At that point, Irushi meets with him, and observing the leader, seems to silently scold him, since he was supposed to be resting, but in the end he goes to truly rest. While doing so, he comments that he took his time to manufacture all the necessary materials for the construction of the village. He remembers when he made his small hut, he ended up suffering quite a bit to carry the materials all by himself, but now with everyone's help, and above all with magic, constructing houses is a very simple task for him. It is then that we see that in record time, the High Elves started to erect the house structure, while on another side we see how the Mountain Elves possess an absurd physical strength, so much so that the poor lizardmen feel a bit nervous, which is why they put up a sign to ban the act of throwing timber. because safety comes first. Thus, quickly in a matter of time, Haraku notices that the village is already taking shape. Ria asks exactly how many people they are expecting, although Haraku does not know the concrete figure at that moment. But right then they are interrupted by Grammaria, who informs Haraku that there is a message from Mr. Drime, announcing that he is already heading there with a new residence. Now in another scene, Drime assumes his human form and apologizes to everyone, warning that the situation is more urgent than he initially expected. Haraku replies that he could have sent a messenger, but Drime reveals that in fact he did so. He sent a messenger from the Wing tribe for diplomatic affairs. However, he ended up flying faster than the adventurer, so that is another story altogether. Without wasting time, he presents the Minotaurs who wish to move to this village, and I was expecting something else. But these Minotaurs here are quite distinct. At this point, Gordon presents himself, the leader of the Minotaurs, and he informs Haraku that they were driven out of their homelands. They had been wandering for a long time, seeking help, and Drime comments to Haraku that since the Minotaurs had children among them, he felt the situation was critical, and that is why he ended up coming so fast. Haraku asks how many people there are, and Drime reveals that there are 72 people. Without wasting much time, they prepare food for all the newcomers. They perform only a simple review initially, because they are not very familiar with the Minotaur's eating habit. Precisely then, Daga appears, the leader of the lizardmen, who lets Haraku know that, coincidentally, he ended up living among the Minotaurs for quite some time in the past, and therefore he can easily interact with them. And if Haraku permits, he can go there to see what the Minotaurs are in need of. Haraku grants permission, and without wasting much time, Daga does his work. The detail is that, later on, Haraku realizes that the houses they manufactured are not of adequate size for these Minotaurs, who are quite large. They relocate them temporarily into a large communal house. Haraku thinks it will be best to leave the village they already manufactured for other new residents, and build an entirely new village for the Minotaurs. Although right at that moment Frau appears, letting him know that her father, Count Bezel, has already arrived with the other new residents. Haraku goes out to meet them, and we see that Count Bezel is quite exhausted, since they were searching for war refugees to bring them to Haraku's village. However, things became quite complicated along the way, and in the end, he had to use his teleportation magic with all the refugees, in order to save large quantities of people all at once. Haraku then recommends that he rest, and when he departs, Haraku meets the new residents, who are centaurs. They are not very small either, and the representative of the centaurs does not have a very friendly attitude, since she warns Haraku that it is best for him to be careful where he looks, and asks if by any chance he does not intend to introduce himself. A somewhat nervous Haraku introduces himself as the village chief, and the representative of the centaurs introduces herself as Glukstad. She is an apparent relative of the influential Viscount, and therefore recommends Haraku to take appropriate measures and treat her with due respect. Thus, a good amount of time passes, and she begins to complain because she waited too long. However, one of the administrative staff members named Yuri apologizes to her, but makes it clear that she has to wait. She understands that the girl is tired from the journey, but now she can rest assured, since she now finds herself safe in these lands, which are being linked to Count Bezel. Haraku, for his part, has no idea how noble etiquette rules work, and therefore prefers to let Yuri take charge of the entire situation. Glukstad continues to complain and be quite arrogant, but Yuri reminds her that in this place, she is the one asking for help and assistance. These lands do not belong to her for her to arrive and claim control or make demands, which is why she recommends her to reconsider her position immediately. Glukstad, offended, orders her to be careful with her words, calling the staff member a village girl. But right then Yuri takes the opportunity to formally introduce herself as the Count's daughter. She belongs to a high-ranking lineage, and the arrogant centaur immediately understands that she is far below in the social hierarchy, and that her position is worth nothing against the daughter of an influential count, which is why her demeanor ends up completely shattered. She then adopts a thoroughly humble posture, dials down her arrogance, and asks for forgiveness for her insolence directly to Haraku. He replies that she should not worry about it, and Haraku is certainly a very kind and understanding person, since if it were up to me, this centaur would have heard a thing or two. And continuing, Yuri asks if by any chance she could be assigned to help them in organizing the new community. She thanks him, although she asks if by any chance everything is fine in her homeland, since she has acquaintances who are facing a huge war, a rather large one, to be generating refugees, and Yuri thanks her for her concern, although she replies that she should not worry. Meanwhile, the girls on the inside comment that Yuri is taking too long, and that lazy girl will probably not return with the paperwork. A little later, upon going to the residences, Hiraku understands that the Minotaurs will not be able to enter those small houses, and that it is also not as if they could shrink their size like Hakuren. Hiraku understands that the best thing is to remodel the residences, and for that reason asks how many refugees there are. Gordon replies that there are about 40 adults and 64 children. In total, it is a large quantity of people, and for that reason Hiraku recommends taking them to the South Dungeon. There, the Lamias can share a bit of their space, and the residents end up thinking that is an excellent idea. However, Rhea asks them why they ended up building this new village in the first place, and Hiraku tells her not to rub salt in the wound anymore. A little later, another group of youths, who were found by the Lamias, arrive at Hiraku's village. He introduces himself to them. Although the girls do not speak much, Hiraku wonders if by any chance that log they are carrying is meant for sitting. But the log itself introduces itself with the name Iggy. It turns out that these girls are from the Nyan Doff race, a species of forest spirits who possess the ability to transform into plants. The detail is that when they are in their tree form, and if they are attacked by a monster, they lose their ability to return to their human form for a while. Iggy makes it clear to Hiraku that they transform into a small log in order to facilitate transport, and reveals that their lands were flooded after humans cut down most of the trees. And so they headed to the Forest of Death after crossing paths with the merchant Michael, who told them about his village. Hiraku understands that these poor souls walked far too much, and therefore offers a banquet, asking what they want to eat. But Iggy replies that they do not want anything, and Hiraku insists, and in the end, she asks for some fruit. She remembers that Michael was transporting a fruit he harvested in that place, and if that place can cultivate fruits of that magnitude, it means it must be an absurd land. Hiraku understands that what they eat is the soil itself, and therefore takes them to the farming field, which happens to be empty. While they enjoy their stay, they make it clear to Hiraku that they need nothing more than clean water, sunlight, and good soil. Upon seeing their size, Hiraku thinks that at last they have obtained the perfect residence for the houses they already constructed. Regrettably, Iggy tells him that she prefers to stay outdoors, and Hiraku keeps insisting, but Iggy keeps refusing. In the end, there is nothing he can do, and so, for the moment, the young Minotaurs, who actually manage to fit into the houses, settle into them temporarily, while for their part, the Centaurs share the stables. Regrettably, the other village on which they worked with so much effort will remain empty for a while, and now, it is up to them to work on the new residences in order to accommodate all these giants. Rhea gets excited about the construction theme, and without wasting time, the residents move forward. However, we see a conversation that Yuri had with the arrogant Glukstad, which made her ask Hiraku for forgiveness. In the conversation, Yuri understood that Glukstad only wanted the best for her people, especially for the young children, but told her that Hiraku was the supreme authority in that entire place, even superior to Count Bezel, one of the 4 heavenly kings of the Demon King. Upon understanding this, it was Glukstad who knelt down, humbly, to ask forgiveness for her insolence, and Yuri is bad to the bone. You have to congratulate her. Sometime later, Hiraku summons the leaders of each race to apologize to them for not having adequate homes ready to welcome them, and besides that, to ask for their help, precisely to establish them in a place where they can stay. Glukstad replies that she will do whatever he commands, and Hiraku tries to ask her not to be so formal, but he ends up noticing Yuri, who is making various signs to him from behind, which is when he informs Glukstad that she has his permission to raise her head and behave in a more imposing manner, since he has high expectations of her regarding the work she will carry out. And Glukstad becomes emotional, while Yuri congratulates Hiraku on his great performance. Meanwhile, he tells the leaders of each race to designate a representative to help each one of them, and Yuri will take charge of the Centaurs, Daga of the Minotaurs, and Mami of the Nyan Doff. She also moved from the Howling Village along with Sina, and it was Sina who recommended her for a higher level position. And now they begin preparing everything to assign their new dwellings, since the houses they made before were for humans. And after securing new locations for the village of the Centaurs and the Minotaurs, Hiraku asks Lastismun and Hakuren for help to clear the paths. They get very excited and transform into dragons, asking how much of the forest they have to burn. Hiraku warns them that they do not have to burn anything at all, and recommends that they return to their human form. Upon doing so, the girls begin dealing physical blows against the trees to clear a path. And as Hakuren is quite competitive, with a kick, she ends up making a very long path. letting Lastismun know that she has plenty of room to improve. They then start getting very competitive with each other, but Haraku calms them down, because otherwise they would cause a complete disaster in the forest. And after removing everything from their path, Haraku and the new residents prepare a new location from the river, thus transporting the water to the two new villages. And in the clearing process, Lastismun shows a great improvement in controlling her brute force. Meanwhile, Anne meets with Lelouch. In order to deliver a piece of clothing they prepared for little Alfred, the new designs crafted by the magnificent Zabuton. On the other side, Haraku is in the second village, almost finishing the large-sized houses. But it is not only the houses that are large, all the furniture is as well. Haraku notices that the beds are a bit peculiar, and the leader of the Minotaurs explains that this design serves so that their horns do not collide with the frame, in the same way that the houses of the Minotaurs are almost ready. Those of the Centaurs are too, but they look more like stables than anything else, since this design is much more suitable, because they resemble horses quite a bit. And the detail is that since the Centaurs have many problems with conventional doors, for obvious reasons, they prefer to have doors with curtains. And for rainy days, some sliding doors. Everything runs smoothly in the great tree villages. While on the other side, Alfred happens to be in a bit of a bad mood. At that point, Anne meets with Lelouch and asks her to allow her to take charge of him. And in a matter of seconds, Anne takes care of making him smile. Lelouch, seeing her, gets excited and asks her to teach her, although Anne replies that this is a professional secret. And so a whole month went by, and thanks to everyone's efforts, the villages took shape rapidly, and they managed to finish everything before winter arrived. Frau asks Haraku what these two villages will be named, and he thinks he could divide them into zones, like upper, middle, and lower zone. But since that sounds very bad, he simply numbers them as village 1, 2, and 3, of course temporarily, since later they could change that. But Frau is bothered by something, and recommends that it is better to select a name as soon as possible, because otherwise the paperwork will become unbearable. Haraku apologizes because she is right, and Tia recommends not naming Village 1, at least for now, since it has no inhabitants, and proposes that Gordon be the chief of Village 2, and Gluckstadt be the chief of Village 3. And with that, there will not be many differences in hierarchies. And for that reason the girls propose differentiating the titles as Big Chief, Super Chief, or King of Chiefs. Haraku tells them not to exaggerate, but right then they are interrupted by Iggy, who asks if he has not considered building a village for the Nyan Daf. Haraku replies that unfortunately they did not plan on doing so, and poor Iggy feels undervalued. But Haraku tells him that in truth, he wants to ask a favor of his people. He reveals that he plans to position them at key points in the forest, and in this manner, they will be in charge of keeping watch and transmitting information, because their species can communicate as if by telepathy, which turns them into the perfect messengers. Iggy thinks this is an excellent idea. Moreover, they can use them for night lighting due to their biological capability. And now that the new residents are established, Haraku plans to assign work to the new villagers, although every time they see Zabuton and Kuro, they end up fainting from fright. Daga and Yuri meet with them to inform them that there is a small problem, and it turns out that the Minotaurs and Centaurs are merely strong in appearance, and although they are quite robust and imposing, they are not suitable for hunting monsters or anything of the sort. The majority of the Centaurs are refugees and barely know how to defend themselves, and Haraku never imagined that hunting would be a problem, since normally the Inferno Wolves are the ones who take care of everything. Tia reminds him that these wolves are very strong compared to regular residents, and for that reason Haraku decides to speak with Kuro and Zabuton to position them as the primary defenses. Finally, they assigned the subordinates of Kuro and Zabuton for the defenses of the peripheral villages, and thus the new residents take charge of plowing the farming fields. Regrettably, after a lot of hard work, it seems that nothing takes root and grows in that place without the direct intervention of Haraku's tool. After thinking for a bit, Haraku understands that if he was able to sow in that forest, it is thanks to his almighty farming tool, which possesses an absurd power that renders fertile everything it touches. Since he is the only one capable of using it, it would be very difficult to prepare the fields of all the villages by himself, and therefore he must seek a solution so that each village can cultivate on its own. Luckily, Gordon has experience because he worked from time to time in his former village with this, and after following his instructions, they sow the wheat seeds, which will be ready for harvest before summer, meaning half a year of waiting is necessary. Haraku thinks that this is a long time, and since he possesses his magic tool, everything becomes easy for him, and it is then that he feels he should express gratitude to the god of agriculture, and for that reason quickly crafts some statues for the gods, and also a shrine to place them in. and when some residents see the statues, they ask who the old man is, since they have a very different interpretation of the god of agriculture. Indeed, the goddess of agriculture is also extremely irritated, because they transformed her once again into an old woman. Thus time continues to pass. And while the Minotaurs take charge of cultivating, for their part, the Centaurs create their own delivery and transportation service. These guys became Mercado Liver delivery drivers. This is very good, but I would not let them deliver my packages. And you? Sometime later, Glückstad meets with Hiraku and comments that she noticed he has a horse on his farm. He tells her that this animal was a gift from the merchant Michael, since he always wanted to learn how to ride a horse. Unfortunately, this horse does not pay much attention to him. Although if she could communicate with horses, it would be a huge help if she told the horse to allow him to ride it. Glückstad replies that regrettably she does not speak the language of horses. But if that horse is not his faithful steed, she herself could be. And now in another scene, we see Hiraku riding Glückstad, and when she begins to move forward, the horse is left wide-mouthed in surprise. Glückstad looks at it with superiority and quickens her pace to make Hiraku hold her tightly so as not to fall. The horse feels indignant while Glückstad takes advantage of the moment. The following day, upon meeting with the horse, Hiraku is surprised to see that it is asking him to ride it. Hiraku gets very excited since, in the end, the animal is allowing him to do so. And while Glückstad is hidden watching helplessly, Hiraku pampers the horse for its great work. And now it is the horse who looks at Glückstad with superiority. And it does not take long for both of them to begin a rivalry to be Hiraku's mount. And upon realizing the rivalry they have, he asks them to calm down, and promises to ride both of them on alternate days. Time continues to move forward, and the new villages thrive more and more. Everything advances perfectly. And although at first Hiraku was quite worried about the large quantity of people they received by surprise, now he is very happy to see that each village will be able to sustain itself over time, even though it still depends heavily on him. He comments to Hakurin that he feels good being useful, but he would like them to be able to resolve some things on their own. He thinks that relying too much on the tool worries him, since although he currently finds himself healthy thanks to the divine powers of the gods, one never knows what could happen in the future. Hakurin observes him and places Alfred into his arms, and asks him to relax a bit, since either way, it is not as if he is going to retire peacefully anytime soon. Hiraku then thanks her for her words, and she remembers that he has many matters to attend to. And that very important matter is that now the Great Tree Village is full of women. More than full, in truth, it is overflowing. And for that reason he quickly meets with Gordon and asks how many men there are in his village, since basically his desire is to marry off a few people. But Gordon replies that the Minotaurs are accustomed to marrying among themselves, above all because of the physical build they possess. So that ends up being a biological matter as well. Hiraku later meets with Glückstad and asks about her men, and she replies that there are about 30, but all are youths because the adults are away at war. Hiraku understands and asks Glückstad to answer a very difficult, yet very important question, and that is how marriage works among the centaurs. But without hesitating, Glückstad replies immediately that she is single. Hiraku then asks if the Minotaurs can marry other races, and she replies that it is a complicated thing, since it is quite difficult for centaurs to pair up with other races. But if he is demanding a woman as payment for taking them in there, she asks him to take her, since she is prepared to serve him, and she is dying to get married to Hiraku. But he asks her to calm down, since that was not what he meant. Glückstad asks if by any chance men do not like to dominate strong women, and Hiraku tells her to calm down once and for all. But she is quite intense, complicating the situation a bit. And so time passes and winter finally arrives. The villagers enjoy the snow and everything runs perfectly well, because they have large reserves of food, in addition to having firewood to keep themselves warm, and everything is going well, perhaps too well, except for one thing. It is the fact that there is far too much food left over. The representatives explain to Hiraku that the new residents, due to their former lifestyle of scarcity, excessively ration their food. Basically for breakfast they consume only hot water, for lunch it was a piece of jerky, and for dinner they went back to drinking hot water. And Hiraku even thought at one point that the real problem would be a lack of rations. But it is quite the opposite. The villagers told them that they do not need to restrict themselves. But it does not work. Hiraku advises them to simply tell them, so that they help consume the foods that spoil too quickly, so that they do not go to waste. Both think that it is an excellent idea. But Hiraku notices that Mommy happens to be very thoughtful. He asks if there is any problem with the Nyan Dolph, and she is quite frustrated, and replies that no, absolutely no problem at all. And that is precisely the problem. Since the members of this race do not suffer from the cold, they do not feel hunger, and the most she could do for them was occasionally clear the snow off of them. She is quite frustrated because she finally has an important position, and simply does nothing. But right then, Daga informs them that now that he remembers, the Minotaurs have a petition to make to the Nyan Daf, and that please, they should wear clothes when they transform into humans. Mommy replies to him that they forget to do so, since they transform only once in a while, but she becomes very happy to see that finally she will be able to be useful for something. Sometime later, Hiraku is preparing a new recipe using rice, and the girls are quite intrigued, and for that reason ask if by any chance he is going to make a new fermentation for beverages or onigiri. But Hiraku asks them to just follow him, so that he can teach the new technique of how to prepare this rice. Once outside, he begins pounding it with a mallet, while the high elves take charge of turning it. The girls notice that it is quite simple, and imagined that it would be something more incredible, and for that reason want to try. The detail is that all of them are exaggerated, and they begin pounding with the mallet in an old-fashioned manner, using magic to unleash 1,000 hammer blows all at once. Everything was going relatively well until Lastismun tries to convert the rice into crystals by force. Luckily there is plenty of rice, and they use the rest to continue with the recipe. And after many yosho, they made various mochai of different flavors, some with soy sauce, and others with peanut butter, and some with kanako. Upon tasting the mochai, the girls became enchanted and fascinated because it has a delicious flavor, in addition to a very elastic texture. And right then, Tia offers some mochai to Hiraku. These had some additions of aromatic plants from the forest, and upon tasting them, Hiraku finds it wonderful. It is milder than mugwort, and Rhea becomes emotional, since he ended up liking it quite a bit. And in order to get those plants they went through hell, since they had to dodge their magical attacks in the forest. Hiraku then wonders what kind of dangerous plants she placed in there. Although right then Donovan arrives, to whom he ended up offering a bit of alcoholic beverage made with rice, and the female consumers do not take long to gnaw on the beverage. The residents then picked up the custom of preparing mochai every sunny day, to compensate for the lack of physical activity in the winter. And the best mochai pounder is no other than Gordon. And so time goes by, and we see that Glatz declares his love to a Minotaur, whom he just met. Her name is Renana. Hiraku asks Bezel what is going on, and he apologizes and explains that one day Glatz ended up insisting on going to the Great Tree Village because he needed to have a good relationship with that community. But in truth, he merely wished to marry Renana. At that point, Glatz approaches Hiraku and asks him to set his conditions for marrying her. Since the girl had said that he should ask permission from the leader, Hiraku then asks him to give him a moment and soon meets with the girls, and asks if by any chance marriage proposals are always like that. They reply that sometimes yes, but normally it is the parents who decide whom to marry. It is then that Yuri begins to tell a fanciful story about how love was forbidden due to their difference in social status, but they did not care and tried to escape, being captured in the end by the leader's guard. And Hiraku stays in the same way as us, without understanding absolutely anything of their logic. It is then that he approaches Glatz, and informs him that there is no problem at all as long as she wants to marry, but he makes it very clear that he cannot force her nor intimidate her, and as long as he respects that, he will have no objection. Glatz ends up getting quite emotional, and he looks at Renana, and both have no idea what they should do, but now they have Hiraku's permission. However, in another scene we see Glatz informing the rest of the Demon King's commanders that he cannot communicate with the love of his life through letters. He needs to see her personally every day, and for that reason he resigns from the demon army. But Bezel asks him to reconsider and regain his composure, because he is the commander of the army, and cannot abandon his responsibilities like that. But Glatz replies that he does this for love, and after an argument, in the end both end up resigning, one for love and the other for laziness, even though Bezel asks them to stop with the nonsense. And back in the village, the group finds themselves preparing onigiri, or sushi. In truth, I do not know very well, but after seeing all the ingredients, Hiraku comments that the nori is missing. The girls do not understand very well, and they think he is asking them to cheer him on. So they start cheering for him, but Hiraku says that is not what he refers to. He explains that nori is a seaweed, but while explaining this, the girls imagine a kind of absurd sea monster. However, Frau, being the smartest, comments that it is something coming from the sea, and probably Michael will know what it is. Without wasting time they go look for him, and upon returning with him, Hiraku apologizes for looking for him in this cold season. Michael replies that he should not worry, because whenever it is about doing business with him, he will go through fire and ice, and he ends up remembering that he was freezing when he was coming. but the important thing is that he has the product that Hiraku asked for. Or at least that is how he judges, because they are not used to eating seaweed. Hiraku then replies that he should not worry about that, since he himself is not an expert either. But quickly he begins his preparation of the nori. First he cuts it very thin to later mix it with water, and right after he places it on a board, and leaves it there, all framed, and upon observing it better, the girls think that it looks very much like a dark moss from the forest. Hiraku thinks they are right. Literally it would be sea moss, right after they remove the frame. And now it is just a matter of waiting for it to dry. It is then that Michael is quite surprised to see that now it looks like paper, and the girls ask if he should eat it like that. But Hiraku stops them and says to toast the nori, so that in this manner it can now be added to the rice. Upon tasting it, Hiraku feels fascinated and enchanted with the flavor, since it reminds him of ancient Japan, and the girls upon tasting are also fascinated as usual. Michael takes the opportunity and comments to Hiraku that they could take charge of collecting the seaweed and processing it to convert it into nori. In exchange, he would provide the ingredients for the machai. Hiraku thinks that this nori can be a quite profitable product, and Hiraku informs him that rice takes time to grow, so they will talk about this later, and Michael thanks him. At that point he comments that he heard they have rice alcohol, although quickly the alcoholic women intervene, because they do not plan to commercialize their precious alcohol. And now a short time later, it is finally time to prepare the sushi, because a voice inside Hiraku tells him that he has to prepare it. The detail is that the girls do not like eating raw fish, so he will have to prepare futamaki. Upon having all the ingredients, he wraps it with the bamboo mats crafted by the mountain elves, and after they are preparing the dish and snacking a little bit here and a little bit there, he scolds them because food should not be snacked on in that manner, referring to their greed. In the end, all the girls are fascinated with the sushi, and with the passing of time, winter finally ends up coming to an end. However, before it actually finishes, Hiraku wants to prepare something before spring arrives, and upon meeting with the girls, he proposes his ideas. They wonder why they should go out with ornaments, or hang themselves and blow up several things, or why even they should be chased by a bull. Hiraku then reformulates his thought, and says that in truth he does not have the slightest idea what to do. He just wants to create a festival now, since currently they count on more than 2 villages. So he proposes the knowledge of festivals from his past life, like rolling down a hill and chasing a cheese, in addition to throwing tomatoes at each other, or running to carry a pudding. But the truth is that festivals are quite rare, and the girls do not understand absolutely anything he is talking about. So Hiraku asks what festivals they know. They then mention some weird festivals with very strange names, which I will not even try to repeat, and Hiraku thinks that if this place counts on festivals, he will have to rely on one. The detail is that the girls could not reach an agreement, because the regional differences are quite large, and Hiraku thought they were small birds, but it seems more like they are creatures that attack the houses of the rich. And in the end, since they reached no conclusion, they decided to draw lots among the festivals of each region, and upon drawing the result, it is simply the martial arts tournament. Rhea is quite euphoric, seeing that it was something very simple in the end, so she informs the girls that the moment to begin with the preparations for the martial arts tournament is now, since maybe, just maybe, they might have the Demon Queen as a special guest. But Hiraku thinks that the lot they drew is a very dangerous tournament, and prays that nobody dies in this festival, and everything turns out to be nothing more than sport. Thus time passes, and with the arrival of spring, we see everyone who is quite enthusiastic, practicing for the martial arts tournament. But Hiraku still has not realized, so he asks Tia why everyone is training, and she replies that it is because of the tournament, explaining that in order to hold power in the Demon Kingdom, one needs combat power. However, Tia merely plays dumb, and Frau says that she has to train. A short time later, Hakurin informs Hiraku that she is going to her house to train, because ever since she has been in that place, she has not used all her strength. He imagines that if she used all her strength, she would destroy the entire forest. So he recommends that she be the referee, since he knows nothing about martial arts, and needs her. This does not convince Hakurin very much. But right after, Hiraku gives that clever speech, that the referee in reality has to be someone very strong, in order to demonstrate to others what true strength is like, and this, as incredible as it may seem, ends up convincing her. The detail is that now he also has to manipulate Lastismun, because she is about to go home to train. and in a desperate tactic, he informs her that he needs 2 referees, and that only the strongest of the strongest can occupy that position. She ends up believing the speech completely, yet they still want to fight. So in the end, Hiraku decides to give them an exhibition match. On the other side, Lelouch is also quite excited, because finally she will be able to deal some blows to Tia, after so much time. Yet she asks when one of her blows ever managed to reach her, and they display their great rivalry. So Hiraku gets quite worried, but now he has to prepare to construct the combat arena, which will have a very large stage, seats and bleacher areas, since that way they will be able to watch the fight peacefully, eat and make those sneaky bets. And before we could even realize, the day of the festival has already arrived, and everyone enjoys immensely. Yuri arrives along with her father, the Demon King Gulgul. After introducing him to Hiraku, he asks how he should address him, since he does not know the customs of the Demon Kingdom. However, Yuri tells her father that it is not worth being so formal like that. So in the end, they introduce themselves with great confidence, and right after, Hakurin arrives with her father, the Dragon King Dorem. Yuri then asks her father if that dragon is a certain dragon that did something, but the king interrupts her and tells her not to speak any further, that she had better keep quiet, and we are left with that doubt about what they wanted to say. Right after, Hiraku takes charge of introducing them, and a short time later Grammaria begins to mark the start of the martial arts tournament of Teju village. It is then that they start explaining the tournament, but then we see Gulgul, who is quite nervous. Hiraku notices that everyone is quite excited, yet he is a bit bothered by the seat they gave him, since he was supposed to be one of the guests, and Lelouch asks him to calm down, and that it is better for him to say a few words. And upon taking the microphone, Hiraku asks everyone to stay calm, and not to rush. He takes charge of explaining the rules of the tournament, in which the fighters are drawn one-on-one. The winner is whoever knocks the rival out of the ring, or by tearing the ribbons that are on their head. The first match is between Rosalind, from the Civil Servants team, against Mamu Ama, from the Nyan Nyan Daf. The combat begins, and the girl demonstrates great combat skills. Hiraku is surprised, since his expectations were high. The winner of the first match ends up being Rosalind, and despite having won, she received quite a bit of damage, and Flora, being in charge of healing the wounded, warns all participants that she can heal their injuries. However, reattaching limbs is the hardest thing, so it is better that they do not tear off their extremities. The tournament then moves forward, and Donovan is the winner of his match. After all, the dwarves are quite strong. Now it is Glukstad's turn, and obviously anyone would think she would be the winner. But since she got carried away, she ended up running too much and went out of the ring. For his part, Kuroichi won his match against the Drunken Slime, and the final match will be Frau, who fights with sword and magic, and Sina, who normally only fights with her physical strength itself. On the other side, Yuri and Gulgul cheer for Frau, and as soon as the combat begins, Frau demonstrates great control of magic, yet Sina demonstrates great physical skills and capabilities, dodging all of her attacks, and right after grabbing her, she tries to throw her out of the ring. However, Frau attacks the rival and manages to recover and counterattack. In the end, both end up falling outside the ring, and the result is a tie. With this, the open combat ends, and the winners will receive those famous medals of honor, while the losers took the applause of the audience. Already better than nothing, right? However, this is only the first part of the festival, and Lelouch and Tia, for their part, observe that among the participants, Hiraku is not present, so they think that maybe there is a little surprise, and Hiraku, hearing them, gets worried, wondering if by any chance he is the unlockable secret character, or something of the sort. Now it is time for the Warriors tournament, where the winner will be the one to leave the rival unconscious, or if they surrender. In this combat, there are no restrictions, and only those who were truly capable could fight to battle under these strict rules. In the first match, Uno, the Inferno Wolf, faces the leader of the Lamias, Junya. She is quite distressed, since the Inferno Wolves almost exterminated her people. Despite that, she managed to put up a fine fight. However, when Uno found himself cornered in the nets, he unleashes his infernal power, and upon seeing his power, Junya ends up surrendering. For her part, Sina panics, and Frau thinks that surely the story that a single Inferno Wolf devastated the entire village is true. And the second match was between Makira, one of Zabuton's great offspring, and Daga, where she manages to dodge all of his attacks, and finally restricts his movements with her spiderweb, winning the match. Now the third match is Goofy against Inyar. He proves to be the best fighter of the Howling Village. Yet at this point Inyar almost sends him flying out of the stage with a blast, although he manages to dodge by a very narrow margin and does not fall off the stage, and seeing that he is no match for her, Goofy ends up surrendering. Right after, it is Grammaria's turn against Rhea. The detail is that for this match the rules change, and now falling off the stage will not cause the match to end, because obviously Grammaria can fly, so it would kind of be too cheap for her. The combat then begins, and Rhea advances at full speed, becoming invisible. This demonstrates that she is a great fighter, although Grammaria feels confident, and upon elevating into the heights, she ends up making a grave mistake, since Rhea was waiting for precisely that. In just an instant she manages to immobilize her, and begins applying a lock to force her to surrender. However, Grammaria does not plan on surrendering, and says that that is nothing, that she has been through much more. And Rhea, understanding that the situation can invert at any moment, launches herself into a kamikaze tactic, receiving one of Grammaria's powerful lightning strikes, along with her. With that she manages to win the match, or at least that was what she expected, had she managed to stay on her feet, because in the end they ended up in a tie. Hiraku on his side thinks that this was an epic battle. However, the true epic battles were about to begin. Now it is Tia's turn against Kyudel, and in just a single movement, Tia leaves her out of commission. Right after it is Lelouch against Koron, who is completely lost, and just as happened with Tia, with a single movement, they leave her out of commission. Now begins the most anticipated match, Lelouch against Tia. Lelouch changes her outfit to combat mode, and after starting the fight, the thing basically transforms into Dragon Ball. The speed of the attacks is so fast and powerful that we cannot even see it. Hiraku cannot understand what is going on, so he resorts to using his tool to be able to see the match. He then gets surprised upon seeing the great power of the girls, and Lelouch attacks with great magical power, basically dragging Tia to the ground, only to step on her right after and unleash a barrage of blows. However, Tia counterattacks, and they begin exchanging blows, while Hiraku thinks, and it seems that these blows stem from friendship. In the end, however, the match ends up being won by Tia, and since Lelouch is a very sore loser, she begins complaining, and a short time later in the final match, it is Tia and Mikura, where poor Tia with just a single movement is rendered out of commission, and in the end, Hiraku takes charge of crowning Mikura, while Goofy and Uno lament, because they had no chance against Mikura. Hiraku then thanks all the participants, and announces that it is time to rest. However, Hakuren and Lastismun start protesting, because now it is their turn to fight, and Hiraku remembers that he promised an exhibition match, so he announces that now is the time for the battle of those two, and upon starting the fight, the collision of their blows was so massive that the energy whirlwind ended up being seen from the Demon Kingdom. And after all that destruction, everyone gets emotional, because at least the alcohol managed to survive, while Lelouch scolds the girls, since they did not know how to hold back. However, they make it clear that they did hold back. The winner of the match was Hakuren, and for his part, Beazle comments that he had not seen a match so exciting like that since a very, very long time. So he asks Gulgold if he would like to face him at some point, but he merely laughs, commenting that it is very funny on his part. On the other side, Frau comments to Hiraku that despite everything, things went quite well. Hiraku cannot believe that for her, this is quite well. Yet the important thing is that everyone had fun in the end. Lastismun asks when the next one will be, and Hiraku replies that, for now, the best thing is to take a break. A short time later, Hiraku finds himself gathering the harvest, along with Sina. When she cleans a turnip, he takes a small bite to taste it, and he replies that it is quite sweet. Sina asks if she can also take a small bite, and Hiraku replies yes, and upon doing so, she replies that it is spicy. Hiraku explains that the bottom part is spicy, the middle is normal, and the top is sweet. Hiraku says that the bottom part is better used in preserves, and since non-perishable foods are never too much, they could start making many with them. However, while conversing, they are interrupted by the children, who inform Hiraku that very strange people have arrived in the village, and taking a quick peek, Hiraku realizes that it is the ancestor, accompanied by a girl. Upon going to the house, Valgraf finds himself quite emotional seeing little Alfred, asking if by any chance he is already 20 years old. However, Hiraku replies that he has not even turned 1 year old yet, and asks who the lady is, since ever since they arrived at that place, he did not even introduce her. She then introduces herself as Fusu, one of the priestesses of the Korin religion. Hiraku introduces himself to her, and asks if by any chance Korin is a religion. Valgraf then explains that it is a grouping of all the gods and religions worshipped in this land, since in its temple, it is taught that everyone should be free to worship their own god. This religion of theirs is basically a VIP club, where all the world's religions are united. Lelouch reveals that the ancestor is the one who leads the Korin religion, and the high priestess Fusu is someone of such a high rank, that even parades are held to celebrate her presence. Hiraku thinks that then they would have to hold a larger reception, though Fusu replies that he should not worry about that, besides the fact that they are already there to make a request. She begs him to please save her son's life, and Hiraku gets worried, while Fusu tells him that in his village, there does not live only the vampire princess Lelouch, there also lives the great Flora, the famous knowledge researcher, and an apothecary without equal. The youths then gather with her, who after boasting about her books, which are used as manuals in all magic schools, tells Fusu with great confidence to speak of what is happening with her son, so that she can get to work. However, when Fusu reveals it, Flora thinks that it is going to be quite difficult, because her son suffers from a combination of the worst illnesses one could imagine. Fusu comments that all the apothecaries and healers she visited said the exact same thing, and Hiraku, seeing her sad, asks if there is nothing they can do. Flora then replies that it will be very difficult, yet says she will not sit idly by. And without losing time, they begin their research work. She asks Hiraku to procure all the necessary materials, and he goes off to retrieve them. The first ingredient is the walking mushroom that wanders through the dark forest, with Rhea and the group of high elves taking charge of searching for it. The second is a white flower that grows on snowy peaks, and by pure coincidence, Lelouch has one in her room. However, since it was a gift, Lastismun will have to retrieve one. The third is a treasure so rare that few can even dream of finding it. It is known as a dragon's tear. Hakurin and Lastismun decide to help him, and with an attack of intense tickling, Hiraku ends up obtaining the famous dragon's tear. And the next one is a dark stone from the Gurugrin mountain, and that name sounds quite familiar. And Hakurin reveals that it is probably the very same thing found in her brother's lair, which they used to keep the door propped open. Hakurin then offers to go look for it, and a short time later, the High Elves return from their expedition. All of them are severely battered, because the mushroom was far more powerful than they expected. Hiraku imagines that it must be a massive and powerful mushroom, yet when they present it, he realizes that it is something quite small. Finally, they gather all the required ingredients, including a potted plant that Michael brought him. Flora mentions that one must be extremely careful when extracting it, and Hiraku panics thinking that it must be one of those plants that scream. That is to say, a mandrake, though Flora yanks it out as if it were nothing. Hiraku ends up covering his ears in fright, yet he soon notices that nothing happened, though quickly the flower begins unleashing a very strange aroma. And finally, they manage to collect all the ingredients. However, now the hardest part begins. Thus several days pass with them attempting to craft a medicine. And throughout all those days, Fusu spent the entire time praying from morning until night. Hiraku recommended that she go rest, though she refused, since praying was the only thing she could do. Yet luckily, after plenty of explosions and disasters, they finally obtain the medicine. Flora recommends delivering this medicine to her son as soon as possible, and Fusu is completely grateful, stating that someday she will repay this. With that, they bid farewell. Yet before departing, Valgraf warns that he will return shortly, at most in about 10 years. Following the departure, now they had to resolve another small issue, and here, thanks to all of Fusu's prayers, the statues of the gods began glowing intensely, even during the night, which prevented Zabuton's family from resting. It is then that Hiraku, left with no other option, decided to install some doors, even though Flora feels as though that might be a bit sacrilegious. Yet in this manner, they would no longer bother anyone, opening only at times when someone actually goes to pray. Sometime later, a few children are harvesting apples, where they notice a small and unusual tree, which is located in Hiraku's experimental zone, since as he can plant anything he imagines with his tool, sometimes he planted things he did not even know. Upon gathering near the tree alongside his friends, he comments that he tried cultivating so many new things that he does not recall what that one is. Frau then mentions that she does not wish to be overly restrictive, since she knows it is an experiment, yet recommends he take a bit more care with such matters, such as recording everything they are cultivating in that village, since one never knows what could end up mixing with the other crops. Hiraku then says that she is completely right, and taking a closer look at it, he wonders what those fruits are. Sina then picks up a few seeds from the ground, and observing them better, Hiraku realizes that they are walnuts. He warns them that they are quite hard, and that he possesses the necessary tools to crack them open, though Tia takes charge of opening them very easily, and I believe everyone in the village could also open them very easily. Frau then maintains a record, while Sina points out that another tree with more small fruits like that is nearby. So upon investigating further, Hiraku realizes that they are almonds, and as he continues inspecting the other things he planted, he also comes across the hazelnut. Frau takes charge of keeping the entire record, while Hiraku finally remembers that at that moment he was dying to get mixed nuts, and was shouting mixed nuts all over the place. However, if that patch of land is for nuts, he wonders what kind of tree he planted right there. Hiraku is still quite confused, and does not know what kind of fruit that is, though when Frau peels it, he remembers that it is a cashew, the bottom part being the seed, and the top part being the fruit. And upon returning the shell and roasting the walnuts, almonds, and cashews, the girls become fascinated with the aroma. Frau then comments that this here would go very well with a nice tea, and would probably sell like hotcakes in the Demon Kingdom. Hiraku then mentions that it is a great idea, since these are foods that take quite a long time to spoil. Thus time passes, and now Hiraku is testing a kind of parachute together with Tia. Hakuren and Lastismun ask what a parachute is, and Hiraku explains that it is something to break a fall, in case at any point he were to accidentally fall off one of them. Hakuren does not understand very well, and Tia mentions to Hiraku that it worked very well, yet doubts that it could support much weight, so they could make a much larger one. The problem is that it could get tangled up quite a bit, and becomes rather difficult to open up. Right at that moment the wine slime appears, making signs to Hiraku for him to give it a ride, and Hiraku, out of respect for the bravery of the little slime, allowed it to make its first test flight. Upon launching it, everything goes perfectly well, and upon seeing it, Hiraku thinks that perhaps this slime is not solely interested in alcohol. Yet he quickly loses that thought when he sees the slime launch itself. It falls to the ground and then walks away. Definitely it does not care about anything else that is not alcohol. Meanwhile, in the workshop of the mountain elves, Hakuren comments to Ya that she wants to talk about the production plan, remembering that they probably should have made a standard bowl, since the girl is making a very large one. Although according to Ya's logic, the bigger it is, the more people can eat from a single bowl. I don't think that is going to work out very well. It is better to have one for each person. It is then that the bowl she was making falls apart. So Hakuren recommends to her that before she begins making them, she should make them smaller. By the way, Hakuren is Ya's assistant. Both grew up together and probably she was the one who should have led. However, she felt that she was better qualified to be her assistant, since she was always more outgoing and an explorer. And after great difficulties they ended up in Teju village, where fortunately they were received by Hiraku. They feel deeply grateful to the village, and as an assistant she must think about how to continue enjoying the comforts of that place, although it seems that Lady Ya no longer wants to worry much about that. Nevertheless, the most important thing is for her people to show that they contributed to the village, and the dexterity of the mountain elves has proven to be very important, and the best relationship they could have is with the most important man in the village, the one who treats everyone as equals and does not seem to have favorites. Yet it would be quite convenient for them to win the favor of the village chief. Fortunately, Lady Ya is trying to do that, though not in the way one might imagine. Every time Hakuren speaks with her lady about the village chief, she gets quite nervous, so she decides to do everything possible to win the favor of the village chief, since she knows that her lady likes him. And we see that Ya finds herself training, and lifting increasingly larger stones day after day, in order to somehow impress Hiraku. However, Hakuren tells her that she does not need muscles to draw his attention. What she needs is a nice pair of attributes that she is currently lacking. Ya questions why it was always said in history that one must be strong to conquer a man, and Hakuren cannot deny that in history they always say that. Yet that will not serve much for Teju village, since the rest of the inhabitants are much stronger than them, and she was able to prove it in the martial arts tournament. Hakuren then says that she does not need to capture him. Yet Ya does not pay much attention, so Hakuren prefers that Ya prove it for herself, and they meet with Hiraku, and he asks what they wanted to show him. Without thinking, Ya lifts a massive rock, commenting that this is the heaviest rock she managed to lift, although she can still continue increasing the weight. Hiraku then panics and asks what she is doing, and a short time later, Hakuren asks her if the girl finally managed to understand that not everything is resolved with brute force. She is quite sad, although Hakuren continues trying to cheer her up, saying that she can utilize other methods, and Ya accepts and decides that she is going to show off her abs of steel, while Hakuren asks why everything has to be about muscle with her. She then says that the girl can use other types of weapons, such as focusing on her legs or her rear end, which honestly are not lacking on her at all. Ya then remembers that she has a certain complex regarding her bust. Yet Hakuren says that it is all for the good of their people. So the girl begins doing push-ups with that massive rock behind her, in order to work her chest muscles that way, though I highly doubt that they will grow in that manner. A short time later, Haraku finds himself at the entrance of his village, where a few people were captured by Zabuton's offspring, a group of angels and a group of harpies. At that point, Gramaria quickly gathers with him to inform him that she did not detect the presence of anyone else near the village. He replies that everything is perfect, yet does not understand why all those women are tied up. Upon seeing the angel among them, he asks Gramaria if by any chance she knows them, and she replies that indeed she does. And it is revealed to us that with the new villages, the territory obviously expanded, so keeping watch over everything with just the three of them was quite complicated. So Gramaria set out to visit the angel settlement to get a bit more support. However, the daughter of an angel leader gathered forces and advanced against the village. For that reason they ended up in that manner. Casually, the furious daughter of that leader asks how long they plan to leave her like that. Gramaria informs Haraku that this girl is named Kirbit, the future leader of the angels. Kirbit gets angry because she considers this an extremely rude way to treat an angel like her. Yet Haraku tells her that they would have treated her as a guest had she arrived like normal visitors. However, since she arrived trying to attack and act tough, the inferno wolves and demon spiders took charge of giving her a good beating. Kirbit replies that she does not plan to do harm, yet they did that in order to preserve the pride of their people, because angels are the virtuous race, worshipped by many, and even so, one of their own lives in a depraved village like that one. And Haraku asks Gramaria if by any chance she is telling the truth. She then replies that the definition of depravity can vary from person to person, and it is then that we see that on a normal day for Gramaria and the other girls. Basically, they spend the entire day sleeping, and Kirbit finds herself quite furious, because what they do in that place is a sacrilege to the angel race. And Haraku asks if she refers to drinking alcohol. However, Kirbit replies no. In reality, she is bothered, because she never underwent the trial to claim a husband. Haraku then asks for a second and asks Gramaria to explain more of this situation. She reveals that the angels are a race composed solely of women, and in order to perpetuate their species, they must attract husbands from other races. Yet they cannot simply choose just anyone. It is a custom of her people to subject those men to an unbearable trial in order to demonstrate their worth. Haraku then asks for what reason she finds herself so furious, and she replies that both Tia as well as her and the rest who are also there live with a man for whom she never performed any trial. Haraku then understands that it is because of this that Kirbit is so irritated, and asks why she does not explain this situation better. Yet Gramaria replies that that will be quite complicated, because Kirbit is very stubborn. Haraku then has a brilliant idea. He unties them all. This startles Kirbit, and he tells them that the conduct of the girls could be considered an attack on the village. And since now they have been captured, they are now free to do whatever they want with them. And of course, only in the case that they truly are their enemies. However, if they admit their mistakes and accept serving under Gramaria's orders, they can forgive them. Quickly, the harpies beg for forgiveness, while Kirbit asks why they are switching factions so easily. Yet, unlike the harpies who switched factions so fast like that, the angels do not think of switching. Gramaria then explains that the angels hesitate to stand against their leader, because even if it does not seem like it, it will be Kirbit who will lead them one day. And if they betray her, in the future they will have no salvation. While the harpies for their part are very happy to serve any angel. Upon understanding this, Haraku warns that attacking the village is a great crime, and as punishment, their leader Kirbit will receive 10 punishments, and knowing that a single punishment is already cause for great suffering, being punished 10 times, will leave her in an even worse state. Nevertheless, if they beg for forgiveness for each one of them, he will reduce 2 of the punishments. Haraku knows that they want to save her, and without hesitating, the angels begin begging for forgiveness, while Kirbit cannot believe it. And Haraku then informs Gramaria that the angels merely needed a reason to apologize, and one of them even says that they will do whatever is necessary for Lady Kirbit. Though in reality she is quite a liar, because what she truly does not want is to be punished. And after a short while they begin enjoying the food, while Kirbit still remains captured, and Haraku recommends that she apologize. However, she continues to refuse. Gramaria then asks Haraku if he could submit himself to an angel trial, in order to try to convince Kirbit. Kirbit thinks this is an excellent idea, since there is no way a man as defenseless as him could manage to overcome the trial. Yet Gramaria knew that her village chief is no ordinary person, and will have no trouble at all overcoming it. In this way Kirbit would have no reason at all to complain, and Haraku ends up agreeing. Upon heading home, Kirbit recommends he not run away. As soon as he hears what the trials are, she explains that it has 5 parts. The first is quite simple. he must demonstrate his wealth, donating 777 gold coins, and Hiraku asks if they would accept goods of equal value in replacement, and she confirms that yes, though highly doubting that that poor village has anything of similar value. However, Hiraku quickly pulls out one of the gifts that Dorame had brought him, and another one that is also worth a fortune. Kirbit stays completely quiet, because that first stone he handed over is already worth more than 1,000 gold coins. Yet since she is quite arrogant, she informs him that she will be kind and only accept the first one. With the first round cleared, now comes the second. They must alternate taking turns to gather stones, and whoever is left last loses. Hiraku understands the rule and asks if he can go first, and quickly defeats her. Kirbit asks for a rematch, and once again Hiraku defeats her again, because as it happens he had already played that with Gramaria and the others, and knows perfectly well that as long as he can choose the order he can always win. A frustrated Kirbit informs him that the next trial is martial prowess. Hiraku is not very confident in his prowess, which makes Kirbit gain confidence, and she thinks about setting up a very complicated rival for him. Yet Gramaria tells Hiraku that he can indeed do this. Nevertheless, Kirbit is quite confident, and says that he will face the enemy of all angels, the diabolical vampire Lelouch. Upon hearing this, Gramaria can barely contain her laughter, while Kirbit says that it will be quite difficult to bring that person. Yet after only a few minutes, Hiraku simply appears with Lelouch right there, and informs her that she wants them to face each other. So he merely asks Lelouch to look the other way, and with that he says that he has already won. While Gramaria is over there laughing her head off, Kirbit cannot stand it, and tells him that the fourth trial is negotiation. He will basically have to negotiate with the guardian dragon of the Gurugran Mountains, the fearsome Dorame, who by coincidence was passing by right at that moment, and asks Hiraku if by any chance he is busy. He replies that at this moment he is. So Dorame replies that then he will return later, complaining because on that day he was bringing some very exotic meats. The angel is still in disbelief at what he is doing. However, now is the time for the last of the 5 trials, the trial of luck. So she shows a coin, warning that if it lands on heads he wins. Hiraku tries, and by coincidence it comes up heads. Yet the shameless woman with all the nerve in the world simply flips the coin over, warning that he failed the trial, because the coin stumbled on her hand. However, right then the coin flips with magic, and Tia steps on it with great force, warning Kirbit that with that Hiraku completed all the trials. Kirbit replies that this goes against the rules. Yet Tia looks at her quite seriously, and asks if by any chance she wants to keep that coin company in the floorboards, and she changes her mind. And now at night, Tia explains to Hiraku that she thought her presence would agitate the angels much more, and for that reason she decided to stay out of sight. Hiraku then understands why he did not see her that much during the day, while we see that Kirbit, who for her part is desperately trying to pull the coin out of the ground. Tia explains that there is a reason for Kirbit to insist so much on the trials. The fact is that what happened with her mother simplified the trials to marry a man of lower status, which caused people to speak ill of her behind her back her entire life. At that point, Kirbit approaches and apologizes to Hiraku. She regrets being so defensive like that and begs for forgiveness, and Hiraku replies that she does not have to worry about anything, and since now she apologized, they can receive her as a guest, and in that manner Kirbit and her group decide to stay in Village 1 for now. And surprisingly, Kirbit is quite calm under normal conditions, even offering advice to improve border security. But just like the others, she is also heavily addicted to drinking alcohol, and on the very next day, now with the vital assistance of the Harpies, monitoring the entire surrounding territory becomes exceptionally easy. Gramaria remarks to Tia that this was not all that they managed to achieve, because the chief of the village could have easily expelled them without trying to protect them, but he chose not to do that. And now that they have complete permission, they can continue staying in that location and serve him as necessary. Thus time continues to pass by smoothly, and at the peaceful village a new dragon appears heading at full speed directly towards Hiraku. Although instead of launching an attack, he merely begs for him to grant a safe refuge in that location. Now a short time later inside the main house, we discover that he is the brother of Hakurin and Driime. His actual name is Domame. We see that on the family tree the very first son is Dorame, the first daughter is Hakurin, and the second daughter is Suiron, the third daughter is Sikiron, and finally there is Domame. He is feeling quite frustrated because his family members always listen to him, but nobody ever truly understands his feelings. He mentions that he faces death day after day continuously, although suddenly out of nowhere a massive loud crash is heard, and Domame immediately falls into full panic, because she has finally arrived. Now, a brand new dragon arrives at the village, and upon transforming and stepping inside the house, She introduces herself as Kwon, the bride and fiancée of Domain. Hiraku introduces himself to her and notices that she seems quite gentle and lovely, so he asks why Domain is so utterly terrified of her. Although it does not take much time before he ends up finding out the truth, the one who actually holds real power in the house is Kwon, so much so that even Doram himself is afraid of her. Hakurin then kindly asks Kwon to please not bother her brother unnecessarily, and she replies that she would never do anything of that sort. On the contrary, she is the one who ends up receiving his poor treatment, since he always promises to take her out on walks and leaves her standing there waiting. Whenever she goes to visit him, he pretends not to be at home. However, despite everything that happens, she never loses sight of her beloved Domain. Kwon then asks if by any chance there is another woman that he adores. But before the entire situation explodes and ends up completely destroying the village, Hiraku steps in and interrupts, and informs Kwon that he urgently needs to speak privately with Domain. She replies that he can speak right there on the spot, but Hiraku insists because they need to talk about men's matters. When taking Domain away with him, he tries to run away to save his own life, but Hiraku stops him, telling him that there is no place where he can possibly hide. They barely know each other, but he senses something deeply dangerous in Kwon. He knows perfectly well that he will never be able to escape from her, and Hiraku asks if there is any condition for their marriage. He replies that they are not even officially engaged yet. Although Hiraku comments that it would be better for him to surrender, because his luck ran out on the exact day he met her. But Domain tells him that she was actually there even before he was born, and upon hearing that, Hiraku recommends that the best thing is for him to accept his fate, but it is still far too early to lose all hope, and the best thing is for him to think of conditions that make this more favorable for himself. He asks if by any chance there are specific things that bother him about her, that he would like to tell her directly, since perhaps in that way he might feel more comfortable with her if she improves. But he replies that she would never accept anything like that, and Hiraku asks if he has ever tried, but Domain reveals that he has not. Hiraku then recommends that he should try it out, but Domain feels that it is completely impossible to speak face to face with her. In that case, Hiraku recommends that he writes down everything that he dislikes, and that he should not leave out a single detail whatsoever. He must not keep anything to himself. He should imagine that every single thing he writes down will help bring change. Domain then agrees to do so, and right after that Hiraku meets with Kwon, and asks if it is true that she wants to marry him. She confirms that she does. Then in that case Hiraku reveals that at this exact moment, Domain is currently writing a letter detailing what he desires from his future wife. She emotionally replies that she would give him anything he wants. Although Hiraku corrects her, he already thought that she would say something like that. But that alone is not enough, because he is not asking her to simply do everything he tells her to do. For as a married couple they must respect each other's feeling. That is why he proposes that she should also write down what she expects from him, whatever she wants him to do and change as well. She also must not hold back anything because Domain will not do so either. She blushes and agrees, and steps away to write everything completely alone, since what she is about to write are personal words that should not be seen by anyone else, except for Domain himself. Hiraku ends up smiling warmly, while Domain approaches him, and tells him that dragon women are extremely difficult to deal with, and that it is better for him to prepare himself. Hakurin asks what he is referring to, and Dorain pretends to be oblivious. Now we see that Kwon is writing very fluently, and on the following day that wretched Domain delivers what is practically a Bible, while Kwon delivers only a small scroll of paper. And in this manner time continued to pass by peacefully, and during this entire period they began to exchange letters back and forth, until they finally reached the point where, when they finally withdrew, they did so together. Hiraku is feeling quite moved and emotional. While Hakurin asks why he was showing himself to be so understanding towards Domain, he reveals that it worried him that she might end up chasing him around in her dragon form. Furthermore, they were not merely complete strangers, so he could not simply just sit back and do nothing. And upon listening to him, Hakurin remarks that then she should also write a letter to him. And Hiraku asks what she would possibly be demanding from him. She says that he will find out very soon. And a little time after that we see the elves, who are extremely happy cultivating the corn. They are cheerful and singing their song. And immediately after that they gather together with Hiraku to inform him about how the expedition inside the northern dungeon went. Well, the plain facts truly speak for themselves. The girls successfully obtained snake meat of the absolute highest quality, and without wasting any time they organize a wonderful feast with all of the meat that they brought back with them. Despite eating a massive amount, there continues to be leftovers, and as if that were not enough, they are so completely absurd that even their meat lasts for a very long time. So they are actually able to regenerate their entire body while the head remains intact. So basically, as long as they possess the head of this creature, I think that the body will continue growing endlessly. It is basically an infinite supply of food. Anyway, continuing on, the girls inform Hiraku that thanks to the hunting of the bloody vipers, the dungeon population is completely safe. Hiraku then asks if by any chance anyone still continues living inside the dungeon, and she replies that there was a group of giants staying there. Hiraku is quite surprised, since this sounds almost as if he were watching a television show about unexplored lands. He then asks if by any chance they discovered anything else, like I do not know, some rare find or something of that sort. They then reveal that the giants talked about some hot water springs in the north of the dungeon. Hiraku becomes extremely happy because it is all about hot springs, and without any hesitation he completely changes his personality and speaks in a much more serious manner, telling them that he urgently needs to send an expedition right away. The girls ask why they would have to go simply to look for a little bit of water when they already have plenty of it available, but he explains that this is not ordinary and common water. These are healthy and cultural waters, extremely good for blood circulation and a whole lot of other benefits. In the end, he manages to successfully convince the girls, and they assemble a full team to go search for the hot springs, with Hiraku going right out in front, which greatly surprises Lelouch, since it is exceptionally rare for him to participate directly in an expedition. Although he replies to Lelouch that he was simply busy before, but now the village is peaceful, much more stable, so he can go out to explore brand new locations. Although that is actually a complete lie. In reality, he is only interested in the hot springs themselves. Hiraku then is feeling quite happy, although Gran Maria asks if by any chance he does not feel that it is somewhat reckless that they along with him make the very first contact with the giants, when in reality it should be the giants who should present themselves to them. Hiraku then replies that such a thing would be quite rude. Moreover, he feels that it would immensely ruin the feeling of being inside a television show about unexplored locations. He then informs the girls that it is the exact moment to set off. Although out of nowhere the ancestor appears, Hiraku asks at what exact moment he arrived there, and he replies that he came to pray to his statues. But like a good busybody gossiper, he managed to overhear everything, and now he wants to accompany him as well. Hiraku then agrees and gives the start to the grand expedition. Although right then the ancestor asks if he wants him to teleport them there, so the expedition aspect was completely forgotten, because basically they just appeared right at the location. An utter anticlimactic moment. This is now right in front of the dungeon entrance. Hiraku notices that something strange is there. The girls tell him that those are the giants, but in reality these right here look much more like stuffed animal plushies. They are extremely agitated and Hiraku asks if something happened, but they simply ignore him and continue running, because right behind them there is an enormous bloody viper. The girls are quite surprised because they were supposed to have defeated all of them, but from one moment to the next the bloody viper starts being swallowed whole. Behind it appears a massive giant land rat. It is basically a giant mole creature right here. It digs rapidly through the ground and charges straight towards Hiraku, but Last and Hakuren intercept it immediately. They send the mole flying high into the air, and now up in the air, the poor mole receives all of the harsh punishment from the girls. Hiraku thinks that this was a bit too excessive, but one of the wolves ends up pushing Hiraku out of the way to save him, since right after that another mole simply swallowed him whole. But our hero does not think of Dejaki merely as his pet, so he simply cuts off the mole's neck to rescue his doggy. Now with the situation completely under control, the giants express their gratitude to the young people for rescuing them, and Hiraku replies that it was nothing at all, while thinking to himself that these cute little creatures are very adorable, and asks if those giant moles are always present around that location. But the giants inform him that those cursed moles started coming out of the hole very recently, and Hiraku asks if by any chance it was the moles that caused the collapse. The cute creatures reply that it was not, but since his people ended up defeating the bloody vipers, this ended up causing some secondary side effects. He understands that the girls went overboard with their strength, so he hopes that they will accept his sincere apologies. And fortunately, they were present at that location. Otherwise, the situation would have been much worse. But the giants ask him not to apologize, because if they had not encountered them sooner or later, Even without the collapse occurring, they would have been completely wiped out by the bloody vipers. Last is feeling a bit embarrassed and ashamed, and looks over at Hakuren, while the ancestor merely listens quietly to everything. Hiraku then informs the girls that although the giants say that it was not their fault, he simply cannot walk away and ignore such a massive hole like this one. The detail is that covering up this hole would simply only postpone the inevitable, so the best thing to do is eliminate the problem at its very roots. At this point, Hakuren offers herself to take charge of the job, and Last also wants to help her, so they begin to argue and discuss a little bit. And afterwards they decide by dividing themselves into groups, the expedition to the hot springs and the expedition to the hole. However, Hiraku asks if by any chance he should not also go to the hole with them. But the ancestor decides to lead that group, informing Hiraku that he needs to focus solely on his original objective. With that, the expedition begins, and although Hakuren is acting a bit strange, Hiraku hopes that everything goes well for them. Thus quickly the expedition to the hot springs gets underway, and with the help of Lee and her huge sheep capable of sensing all the dreams of the forest, she informs Hiraku that she can hear the sound of water. Tia recommends that they wait for Gran Maria, who is currently patrolling the surrounding area. Although at this very moment, she notices that the tree upon which Lee is standing has enormous claw marks on it, and if these marks are located so high up on this tree, it means that the beast that left them there must be huge, and no sooner said than done. Behind them appears an enormous giant bear, although Hiraku sends it to the other world in a single second. Gran Maria upon returning is deeply impressed, and later on finally the young people reach the hot springs. Although Hiraku notices that the water is extremely hot, Lee then examines it and confirms that the bubbles are free of toxins, and Hiraku congratulates her on the excellent work, since he had not thought of that possibility himself. He wonders if by any chance there is an active volcano near that place that makes the water be so hot like that. But Tia replies that there is no volcano anywhere near, so this must certainly be the work of that specific type of rock. After giving an example to Hiraku, she simply explains that it is a thermal stone, which is capable of storing heat and releasing it very slowly. Hiraku then gets an idea of how to use this stone to heat up the rooms or cook during the winter. Lee remarks that they have already found the source, but what should they do now? Hiraku then asks if there is cold water near that place, and Gran Maria informs that there is a river nearby indeed. Hiraku becomes extremely happy, and comments that then his idea should definitely work. Meanwhile, in the dungeon expedition group, Hakuren is completely obliterating everything that crosses her path, without even exploring properly. Lelouch scolds her because if she continues doing that, the others will not be able to breathe, and also they will not be able to walk forward. Anne comments that they will end up melted before any monster shows up, which is why the women control themselves a little bit. Although Hakuren seems quite bothered and annoyed, for some reason that we do not know, the ancestor then notices that the collapse simply connected both of the caves, and the path that the moles created moving forward in a straight line is very suspicious. Perhaps the moles were simply searching for something. One then goes to the west and the other to the east. It is then that Hakuren asks Last to go in that direction, while she goes in the opposite one, and the ancestor begins dividing them into two groups. He goes along with Hakuren, while Lelouch and Flora go with Last, and he hopes that they do not run into any terrifying beast. But looking at Hakuren, he thinks that maybe it is actually better if they do run into one. And back to Hiraku's group. He takes charge of creating a channel to join the river water with the thermal water. So in this manner he will manage to create a small warm water spring, and Hiraku is very happy building the hot spring baths, while Gran Maria wonders why construct another bath far away from the village, when they already have a very luxurious one back in it. But soon she will end up finding out. Rin then replies that she certainly would have thought the exact same thing some time ago, but now that she knows the wonderful miracle of baths, she is extremely excited and thrilled. Just at this moment, by pure coincidence, Keb was flying over the place. But it was actually not by coincidence at all. In reality, she was actively searching for them, because she wanted to see what they were doing. Upon seeing Kubit, Hiraku asks her to help with the tree logs, and she starts complaining, asking why she should move a muscle. But Tia recommends that she do it, if she wants to enjoy what comes afterwards. Without wasting any time, the group begins moving forward and constructing the structures, while on their end Last's group continues advancing, wondering why those moles would advance so far in a straight line, if they did not even have a source of food around that place. She wonders what they were trying to do, and everything is extremely suspicious, and that is why Lelouch and Flora think that the best thing would be to turn back, although Last refuses, since she cannot return empty-handed. Furthermore, she also thinks about taking care of any enemy that crosses her path. The girls then decide to follow her, and upon advancing a little further, they come across a strange rock with something written on it. The text is very ancient, and it is noticeable that it seems like they can climb up. But as they attempt to do so, a horde of undead attacks the women, but there is nothing to worry about because Last is with them. And the detail is that she charges against them with her blast of flames, and Lelouch reminds her that she cannot attack using fire. But she is smart and says that she certainly can do it, as long as she aims and attacks upwards. In that manner she obliterates the undead, but directly above is the forest, and it ends up catching fire. The young people for their part end up noticing the smoke, and Tia goes quickly to investigate what is going on. Upon arriving at the location, Lelouch asks her to help extinguish the flames, while Last becomes worried upon seeing that the fire is not going out. A little time later they gather together with Hiraku, who asks if they managed to put out the fire. Lelouch replies that somehow they managed to do it, and scolds Last because she had already warned her. She then apologizes sincerely, although Hiraku informs that she should not worry about anything at all. Furthermore, he has good news, since they managed to successfully build the hot springs, and on this night everyone will be able to relax at that location. Then we see that Hiraku practically set up an entire leisure complex, and at nightfall the women relax inside the hot springs, and since they are out in the open air, the cool fresh air feels absolutely delicious. Now they could no longer do the bath back at the village, although we notice that Last is a bit downcast and solemn. Naturally, after burning down the entire forest, anyone would notice that. Right, on the other side the three girls here are inside a sauna, although Kubit is complaining because it is way too hot. She then asks why they should be doing this training, and Gran Maria says that it helps to have much more beautiful skin. That being so, she thinks about giving it her absolute all, because as the future leader of the Angel clan, she has to secure a good husband. Gran Maria then asks if she still worries about those old customs, and she replies that nobody wants to marry a strange man, and confesses that marrying the village chief would have been absolute perfection. But now it is far too late for that, although there is still his son whom she could reserve for herself. The women then begin to laugh while commenting that so much for her strong principles, but the Angel makes it completely clear that he is the best possible candidate. Although Tia mentions that if she said something like that back in the village, she could be considered a dead person, and it seems that it is past time to reinforce the security around little Alfred. For his part, Hiraku thoroughly enjoys the hot springs, and thinks that he has to improve that location even further, so that in this way all of the village inhabitants can enjoy it. But soon reality strikes him. Neither the ancestor nor the others have shown up yet. It is then that we see how deep inside the caves, a group of undead is being led by the Skeleton Lord. He comments that it is best that they do not stand in his way. But at that exact moment Hakurin charges straight against him, and a grand beatdown festival begins. Meanwhile, the ancestor comments that first it was the moles, and now there is an army of armed undead, so he wonders what they could possibly be doing so deep down below. Hakurin on her side continues enjoying the total slaughter she is carrying out on the undead, while the ancestor thinks that he went along with the young people to have a little fun, but it seems that he ended up getting involved in something quite serious. However, for the moment, the best thing is to let Hakurin handle everything by herself, because trying to stop her would be much more problematic. On the very next day, the ancestors group gathers at the hot springs, where they inform Hiraku that they worked extremely hard. He asks if they managed to discover anything, and the ancestor confirms that they did, revealing that it seemed like someone quite evil was doing some wicked things. But Hakurin says that she taught them a good thorough lesson, and Hiraku asks what they are referring to. He explains that there were countless undead, but Hakurin finished off every single one of them. He tried to investigate a little further, but it was completely useless, because everything was reduced to absolute ashes. Hiraku then asks where Hakurin is right now, and is informed that she is currently with Last. She is extremely exhausted and tired, but despite everything thanks to her, there should no longer be any danger whatsoever. Hiraku feels thoroughly relieved, but the most important thing right now is to know who that little girl is. The ancestor then reveals that she is the actual leader of all those undead, so Hiraku cannot bring himself to believe that such a tiny girl is the mastermind behind everything. Although the ancestor explains that in the beginning she appeared just like any other ordinary undead, but Hakurin beat her up and pummeled her relentlessly until she could take no more, and she ended up ending in this exact state. And the beating must have been so severe that she even lost all of her memories, and now she is in no position to cause any harm at all. But they cannot simply let her wander off out there on her own. So Hiraku understands and asks the little girl what her name is. It is then mentioned to him that she became like this before she could even state her name, which means that Hakurin did not even give her the chance to speak. He wonders what he should call her instead, and the little girl, after thinking for a short moment, comments that they can call her Ursa. She remembers absolutely nothing about her past, and since there is not much else that can be done, Haraku simply introduces himself to her. But now we see a brief fragment from Ursa's past, when she was the mighty skeleton lord of death, or lady in this case, who knows. She had awakened from her long slumber, and at that moment she also did not remember who she was before, only that she was called as such, the Lord of Death, and the entity that awakened her gave a direct order to break the seal of that land, and since she also did not have many other things to do, she decided to obey that order. With her dark powers she would build an entire army and destroy the seal completely. Her very first summoning was quite weak, but little by little she began creating more. Furthermore, she started putting the earth golems to work on creating the tunnel, and for some strange reason, she felt that the seal was located in that direction. That was how she ended up finding that peculiar black stone. Thinking of such success filled her with deep excitement, although she felt that this could not possibly be the end of it, so she continued digging much further down, until she came across several corpses, and decided to reanimate them to expand her ranks. Her small settlement was growing larger and larger, little by little, although at a certain point she wondered to herself if digging holes was truly the proper job of a lord. Nevertheless, thinking too much made her waste precious time, and since she had nothing else to do, she simply continued digging. Over time, other monsters joined her endeavor, and they were exceptional excavators. They dug continuously for decades and managed to find the next black stone. Together they celebrated the fruit of their success, although they still did not know how many stones remained. But they were very excited to find every single one, or at least that is what they expected, because out of nowhere they encountered the wild woman, and from one moment to the next they no longer remembered anything. The horned woman and a man with a tired countenance dragged her out of the cave, and she did not know why, but for some reason she felt intense hatred towards Harem. But the reason why is completely obvious. Basically, the beatdown she received was permanently engraved into her DNA. Now returning to the present moment, Tia asks Haraku if they will allow her to stay at that location, and he confirms that they will, at least until the little girl remembers something. So far the only thing they know about her is that her name is Ursa, and upon hearing that name, Tia mentions that this name reminded her of something. It was from the legend of the hero Queen Reze. Tia is surprised by such a mere thought, although it might also be just a pure coincidence. Haraku then asks if by any chance she is someone famous, and notices that her hair is quite peculiar. Anne asks Haraku if she can use the baths to clean Ursa up, and he replies that she can. He recommends to the ancestor that he do the same, and he without any hesitation thoroughly enjoys the bath. While doing so, he comments to Haraku that it seems these tunnels are quite important, but with the skeleton lord gone, the giant land rats will not return to cause trouble. Nevertheless, he feels that the best course of action would be to seal these tunnels for the overall safety of the giants. But before doing that, first one must properly enjoy this delightful bath as it ought to be enjoyed. On the other side, Anne is trying to wash Ursa, who complains heavily because she does not want to take a bath, but Anne makes it completely clear that she cannot leave until she is clean. Ursa then complains that the water is far too hot, and asks her to get in as well. Anne replies that she cannot do that because she is merely a servant, but the girl insists so much that Anne ends up getting into the water, and a little later, Harem and Last enter the bath as well, and Ursa upon seeing her makes a sour face and leaves. On the other side, the angel Kubit, after having enjoyed the hot springs, decides to depart because she has official work to do in the kingdom of Garek. After all, she holds a very high position, so much so that even kings request her presence. Anne then remarks that she is such a busy young lady, who puts her responsibilities aside just to go to the hot springs, although Kubit replies that it is merely a coincidence, and departs quickly. Later on, Haraku finally decides to investigate the black stone, and notices that there is a large amount of ashes all over the place. The ancestor reveals that the two deer dragons went ahead and finished off all of the monsters nearby. The girls ended up overdoing it just a little bit with the dosage, and Haraku decides to investigate and notices a strange mist coming out from under the stone. The detail is that it seems he is the only one who can see it. He strikes very easily with his hoe, and upon noticing this, the ancestor asks if something is going on. Haraku explains that there is a black mist coming out from under the stone. However, the girls cannot see anything at all, and he mentions that it seems like it is searching for something. Upon listening to him, the ancestor mentions that apparently burying that stone is not going to solve the problems, which is why perhaps they should destroy it. But Harem does not think twice, although Last stops her and tells that when she encountered that stone, she could notice just how resistant it was. If they try to destroy it, they will probably destroy everything around it, and the stone will still remain intact. Hirako then asks if he can carve it, but the ancestor comments that this is going to be very difficult, since not even the dragons can break it. But Hirako decides to try, and quickly carves a structure of God, because he thought that perhaps the power of God would help him keep it sealed. Effectively, the sculpture ends up lighting up, and Hirako asks for the ancestor's opinion, but he is already prostrated praying to the statue, and Hirako proposes burying all of that. But the ancestor refuses, because he cannot bury the god of creation. Besides it being a very beautiful sculpture, in the end they decide not to bury it. Instead, with the help of the ancestor, they created protective statues, which apparently come to life to fight evil if necessary, and they also placed others on the surface. The ancestor expresses his gratitude and asks Hirako that if he finds more black stones he should also carve them. Hirako obviously accepts, and the ancestor gets very excited, returning without losing time to the hot springs to prepare an even deeper expedition into the tunnel. On their side, Hakurin and Last are quite distant, and although Hirako calls them, Hakurin flies away out of nowhere, and he asks what on earth happened with her. But Last approaches him to try to say something, and on the other side the ancestor gathers with Tia, Flora, and Gran Maria to ask for help in the grand expedition. Back with Hirako, he asks Last what is going on, and the young girl, somewhat downcast, begs for forgiveness for not being so useful. Hirako then makes it clear that this is not true. She has already defeated many monsters and did an excellent job, although she replies that it is not quite like that, because she used her fire despite being told not to do so, which caused the entire forest to burn down. Hirako replies that the fire has already been put out, and the fault was his for having sent her to such a dangerous place, asking for forgiveness for that. But Last asks him not to apologize, because he did nothing wrong. They wanted to help, but they made it so that he had to apologize. Hakurin, and she caused a collapse in the dungeon. Yet it was he who bowed down to apologize. Hirako finally understands what was bothering them, but makes it clear that he feels a leader must always answer for his people. Although Last replies that it is not like that, because important people should not keep apologizing so easily. Hirako understands her, and upon returning to the hot springs comments that the fault was his. Although Last gives a stern look, he apologizes and warns that it is already a habit. Thanking for all the help, Last entrusts the rest to him, and comments that her aunt Hakurin was the one who took it most personally, and for that reason Hirako gathers with her, and asks for forgiveness for making her go through so many troubles. Hakurin realizes that Last was the one who asked him to speak with her, and Hirako confirms that, this and a few other things, but now he understands that she was worried about him, and mentions that it is difficult to answer for everyone in that location, since he always has to make sure not to cause trouble. However, Hakurin asks him to forget all of that. He is the leader, he is the chief, and when things go well, they say so, and when things go badly, as well, and that is simply everything. Hirako comes to understand her better, and makes it clear that she did an excellent job. That comment ends up completely disarming Hakurin, who asks that she be praised for it. And look, alright. On the other side, the Ancestors Expedition group manages to find the second stone and another tunnel. The girls advance forward, but notice that it is a dead end, which means that perhaps it is not finished. The ancestor without hesitation already puts the girls to do all the hard work, and they give their absolute best, but they only advance 30 steps. And because of that, Flora decides to use her most powerful spell. The ancestor stops her, because that could end up causing a collapse, and it is better to advance little by little using magic swords and excavation. A short time later, we see that the girls return to the hot springs, and they are completely exhausted, but they manage to obtain another stone, meaning now there are 3 in total, at least for now. Hirako then assumes that if all of them are situated around that location, they are possibly connected, and most certainly have that layout totaling 7 stones. The ancestor replies that it is an excellent deduction, and that the best thing would be to excavate from the surface at the other locations. Seeing that the women are deeply exhausted, Hirako offers to help out, although Lelouch refuses because it is far too dangerous, and in the end the Ancestors Expedition team takes charge of excavating the designated locations, starting the most difficult project up until now. There was no way of knowing if they would manage to find the stones they were looking for, but the girls worked extremely hard, and came across unexpected water sources, working in total darkness and finding subterranean dungeons, in addition to monsters that were insects, and they did not handle that very well at all. They did not know whether it was day or night, but the ancestor pushed their mental stability to the absolute limit, and upon returning to the hot springs, Anne welcomed them with a special energy-restoring magic menu. Lee, seeing that they were going through very difficult times, offered to help them, but soon she realized that it was better to have kept quiet instead, and Hiraku, to help them out a bit, implemented a secret weapon, the dragon group. When the young people attempted that, it simply caused a massive collapse, and all of the effort went down the drain. An aura of evil darkness began to envelop the workers. Their intense frustration was right on the verge of exploding, or rather, right on the verge of sending the ancestor to the next world. But luckily, before obliterating him, they managed to obtain the final stone, and all of that effort, sweat, and tears was entirely worth it. Just as Hiraku had deduced, it was a total of 7 stones. The effort was completely absurd, so much so that for some very strange reason, the ancestor began feeling chills running down his spine, and the reason for this chill was simply the exhausted girls, who were casting a deadly glare directly at him. Poor Hiraku understands that a simple good job on this occasion is not going to be nearly enough, and because of that he must think of how to reward the girls properly. However, the ancestor does not even let him think of anything, because he reminds him that now it is his turn, and this time he does not merely want to focus on the god of creation, showing him other gods that he could potentially carve, and he is visibly thrilled and excited about this. Meanwhile, on the other side, we see a brief glimpse of the past, in which a comet crashes directly against the Earth. However, it was no comet at all, but rather an archdemon, who finds himself eager to take revenge upon the gods. And back to our beloved group. They return to the peaceful village, and celebrate with a grand feast after a very long time. The participants of the expedition share everything they went through, while Hiraku thinks that it is a perfect moment to be able to relax and rest up. He thanks the young people for all of their hard work, and Tia confirms that indeed it was very hard work, so much so that they were right on the verge of driving a strike straight through that cursed ancestor's head, with a very powerful blow. Hiraku then thinks that at least they managed to dissipate that dark energy, and hopes that everything goes smoothly. Right then he notices the presence of Bezel, and comments that it is quite rare to see him at a banquet like this. He replies that he was extremely busy, and because of that had to decline all of the previous invitations, but now that they have resolved all of the issues, they can relax and sit back and enjoy the feast. Hiraku then asks, "Who is that speaking with Dream?" He replies that his name is Randon, one of the 4 generals of the Demon King, and the person in charge of internal affairs. He could easily be the Radon from Elden Ring. He casually comments with Dream that the troublemakers who caused issues inside the borders seem to have changed their attitude completely. Dream replies that even someone who was against his father is not going to ask for forgiveness out of nowhere, although there is no way to explain it, and the best thing is to celebrate with alcohol. But Randon, while making a toast accidentally on purpose, stains Dream's tie, and like a proper coward that he is, quickly bows down to beg for forgiveness. Bezel supports him and begs for forgiveness, while terrified out of his mind for the carelessness of his subordinate. But Dream makes it clear that he should not worry about that, and that he is a very well-trained subordinate, because the bow that he performed was absolute spectacular. On the other side, the ancestor is commenting with Hiraku that now he feels wonderful. He is practically brand spanking new after stepping into the hot springs. Hiraku then feels genuinely glad, and mentions that now suddenly everyone's worries dissipated out of nowhere. And the ancestor replies that his people also informed him of the same. But now the most important thing is that he would like to speak about that thing over there. Hiraku then replies that it is that wine slime, although the ancestor replies that he is not referring to that, but rather to the creature right beside him. Hiraku replies that that is a cat, and the ancestor says that he knows perfectly well that it is. What he wants to know is since when he has had one. Now we see a little bit of the past. Hiraku is remembering that when he returned to the village, he simply found it at that location. It seemed as though the animal surrendered, and he simply adopted it. Before he thought that someone had brought it to that place, but apparently nobody knows anything about it. The ancestor is finding all of this very suspicious. But since the little cat had no issues with Zabuton and Kuro, if it wants to stay it is free to do so. But upon looking at the past once again, we see that at the place where the comet crashed, the archdemon was right there, mentioning that a very long time ago, he was defeated in a battle against the ancient evil gods. He comments that for countless years he remained sealed, but he did not plan on surrendering, and because of that he made his preparations, so that the day of his return would be the last for the gods. But the detail is that out of nowhere, one of the cursed stones that was sealing him suddenly took the form of the god of creation, which ended up strengthening the seal. But none of that was going to stop him, and a simple strengthening seal was not going to halt him. But the real problem started when all of the other stones began taking the form of gods. This ended up causing intense and powerful pain, and suddenly he appeared in another location out of nowhere, in the body of a cat. An ordinary cat apparently, so there was no other option left for him, except to surrender and not care about anything else. On the other hand, in the realm of the gods, they wonder what they should do with that creature, and the god of creation comments to his daughter that Hiraku's statues ended up applying a divine punishment, and in turn brought the archdemon to salvation. The goddess of agriculture asks if by any chance being reborn as a cat is salvation. She also says that Hiraku is now practically a divine agent. However, the god of creation makes it clear that he does not want that position, simply that he desires a peaceful life, and he will make sure that this new life of his is better than it seems. But the goddess reminds that all of this is his fault, for having sent him to the forest of death in the first place. But the god of creation replies that he has to look at the positive side. Hiraku ends up accomplishing great feats now, and all of this in some way is thanks to him, so he asks his daughter to finally free him from that 300-year punishment sitting in that position. After thinking a short bit, she frees him, and the god of creation excitedly stands up, but gets a severe cramp. While he contorts in pain, the goddess of agriculture mentions that Hiraku is nothing more than a man, and yet he is capable of saving even the gods. So she hopes that the future brings him good fortune, and also hopes that he carved the statue he made for her properly. A short time later, we see little Ursa, who is bothering Anne, asking for them to go play together, while Hakurin watches deeply irritated, informing Ursa that she has plenty of time, and that they could play together. But she refuses, and seeing that the little girl does not want to be with her, she walks away irritated once again, since Ursa simply enjoys her time with the servants, and does not want her company. In another scene, we see that she is having a lot of fun. Despite having no memories, she is a very energetic and joyful young girl, who adapted very quickly to her life at that place. Now we see that Ursa is speaking with Last, and asks her to transform. She ends up doing so just to get the girl to stop bothering her, but Hakurin watches them with envy, and seeing that Ursa liked Last's transformation, she also transforms herself, although she is simply ignored. On the other side, Hiraku asks one of the servants if she has not seen Hakurin, since the children from her reading and writing class are waiting for her, but she informs him that they will have to study on their own, because Hakurin went to sleep. He understands that poor Hakurin could not manage to get along with Ursa, and they comment that it is Ursa who thinks they do not get along. But also, after the beatdown that she received, there is no way to expect anything else. It was permanently engraved into her DNA, even without her remembering it. Hiraku then wonders if they could find a way to bring them a little closer together. Until then, one day, he noticed that little Ursa was making earth golems, and upon approaching, he saw that it was not working, and because of that decided to help her by bringing clay, but it also did not work. Out of nowhere, Hakurin began acting up just to draw Hiraku's attention, and offered to help out. After a brief game of charades, just to state that she had an idea, she shows Ursa one of her scales, which after pulverizing them and mixing it with earth to become more resistant, they managed to make Ursa's small golem stand up, and she very emotionally expresses her gratitude to the girl. And from that moment onwards, they started to get along well. Now we see that this small golem is exceptionally strong, and Lelouch asks Hiraku what exactly that thing is, and Hiraku reveals that it is a small golem that they created together with dragon scales. Lelouch is deeply surprised because dragon scales are one of the rarest and most valuable items in existence, since they help enhance all kinds of magic. But in order to work with them, one needs a magic furnace the size of an entire house. Hiraku then tells that Hakurin simply crushed them with her bare hands, and shared that they fall off all the time when she is in her dragon form. And indeed, he possesses a warehouse filled to the brim with scales. Lelouch makes it completely clear that if all of those scales were to reach the black market, the entire world would fall into absolute chaos, and because of that, the best thing would be to store them away until they find a way to dispose of them properly. But the important thing right now is to enjoy the touching scene. A short time later, a loud crash is heard inside the village, and when Hiraku steps outside to investigate, he comes across the mountain elves. They are currently testing out their brand new stone thrower, and Hiraku makes it clear that that thing is a catapult, and asks why they want it. They reply that it is not for anything in particular, and simply thought that it could prove useful for launching heavy items. Although after thinking for a short moment, Garten comments that it seemed to be somewhat larger, and they could use it as a weapon. To her it seems like an excellent idea, and comments to Hiraku that if one day he plans an invasion, they will manufacture a whole bunch of them, but Hiraku replies that he does not plan on doing any of that. Now we come to know that ever since the elves joined the village, they have developed many brand new tools. They ask what they should do with the catapult, and Hiraku replies that they can use it for whatever they want, except for violence and launching odious things. Now inside the mountain elves' workshop, Hiraku asks them to manufacture something that can be used for cooking, such as lids, pots, and those kinds of items, since with proper lids for pots it would be much easier to cook better. The girls understand that he desires something that retains the heat inside the pot. So quickly they put their hands to work and conduct several experiments. Through trial and error, they understand that they need something very resistant. So after a period of work, Hiraku goes to inspect them and notices that they made a pressure cooker. But since they did not leave any outlet to release the pressure, the pot presents a small leak, and when she attempts to seal it up, she ends up causing an absurd explosion of the pot. However, the group of mountain elves finds itself determined, and if they cannot create a good pressure cooker, they will make a chair, specifically a massaging chair. As test subjects they take Tia and Anne, who seem to be the ones with the most sore shoulders. Although when Hiraku notices that that machine possesses far too much power, he asks them to test it first with a pumpkin. And it is a good thing that he proposed that, because otherwise, the two of them would have been killed, but that ended up being Tia's fault, who asked for it to be stronger when they were testing it out. Upon adjusting the strength, Anne comments that she wanted to test it, and the best thing would be if they could adjust the position. And now with the massage chair being a complete success, Hiraku asks them to manufacture springs to use inside their beds. But since the young girls made them excessively large and resistant, he proposes using them for large vehicles such as carriages. But the village does not have a carriage, so the young girls depart along with Lass to be able to purchase one. Upon buying it and returning to the village, they quickly install the suspension system. And unfortunately they were not sufficiently resistant, but the girls were not going to give up. So after painstaking hard work, they managed to create an all-terrain vehicle. Now they are right on the verge of testing its resistance, but upon seeing the type of test they want to perform, Hiraku refuses to be their guinea pig. Upon preparing the track, the start of the test begins, and the carriage flies high through the air. The detail is that upon impacting the ground the springs work, but not as originally expected. Hiraku then asks how on earth that thing is bouncing like that, and Garten confesses that they used dragon scale powder to reinforce the spring, since in that manner it would manage to land smoothly. She comments that there is still work remaining, since it could have flown much higher into the air, but Hiraku makes it completely clear that that is not the point, and after a long process of trial and error, they ended up using a leaf spring in place of the other, and they worked exceptionally well on the cargo carts. And since the mountain elves are deeply stubborn, after a lot of hard work they managed to obtain the pressure cooker. A short time later, Hiraku and the girls are preparing to set up another new festival. However, they are always arguing to see what they should choose, seeing that things are not going to move forward very fast if they let them take charge of everything. Hiraku decides to hold a vote. However, he warns that they must not choose martial arts, because they have already done a festival for that, and afterwards the schedule could become a bit repetitive. The young women write on wooden slates and place them inside the raffle box, where Hiraku takes charge of drawing the winner, which results in sliding. He wonders what that refers to, and Fraum explains that it is a festival from the Falk region. The participants basically slide down the hills, and Hiraku even understands, until the young women reveal that it is well known because its participants are burly, and collide with one another while competing. It is here that Hiraku realizes that he did not understand any of this, and so he warns that this one is far too dangerous. So he decides to draw another, although it comes up as sliding again, and since apparently everyone chose the exact same thing, they finally decide to organize this sliding competition, but in a much safer manner, applying the rules of no pushing, no running, and no cheating. The young women ask what will happen to the burly men, and Hiraku warns that they will have to open the festival to many more people. The detail is that near the village there are no large hills, so they started to create one, digging a massive hole and using the soil to raise a hill. Soon they built a track leading from the hill straight to the hole, and the work lasted for several days. But finally they manufactured something like a pyramid. With everything ready, the festival commences, and like any good festival there are food stalls, where the villagers enjoy themselves greatly. Hiraku and Fraum announce the rules, making it clear to the entire public that the participants must slide down from the hill, launch off the ramp from the edge of the hole, with the goal of reaching as far as possible. And like any proper competition, there is a specialized team on standby to save lives. The first to participate is Rosalind from Village 2, who is wearing a fabulous swimsuit, designed by Zabuton. That clever spider manufactured a whole bunch of swimsuits at Hiraku's request, and Rosalind tries to slide, but it goes very poorly for her. So she tries one more time with much greater force, and this time everything is perfect. Now it is Daga's turn, who approaches like a total professional, showing great control over the board, thereby breaking a new record. Soon it is Flora's turn, who despite executing a spectacular jump does not advance very far. Thus little by little everyone participates. However, the cheating Tia ends up being disqualified, since after jumping she simply began to fly. Lelouch laughs at her, although she was also prepared to cheat, and Lelouch, just like Daga, achieves a great distance by making the board bounce. And soon it is Senna's turn. She feels a bit uncomfortable, because she feels embarrassed having people see her navel, and Hiraku warns that she does not have to do it if she does not wish to. Although in the end she ends up jumping anyway, but does not get very far. Next it is the turn of the administrative girls on their long inflatable float, and they execute a joint jump together. However, they did not break any records, but the crowd goes wild, and upon coming out of the water, they force the poor girl who was stationed there to jump as well. So they place the float on her, but the detail is that while sliding she ends up falling headfirst into the water, but nothing that the life-saving crew cannot handle. The contest proceeds very well, but now they say it is Froum's turn to jump, and she refuses, commenting that she is far too busy with a microphone, but she is forced to participate all the same. When she is on the platform she cheats using her wind magic, so she is also disqualified. Now it is Last's turn, who executes a very high jump, but not very distant. With that the competition comes to an end, and after looking at the results, the winner was likely Daga. That is what we would have thought. But Zabuton entered at the very last second, and she rapidly slides down, and begins performing a massive spinning jump. With this she increases her friction, and now at immense speed, and with the bounce, she manages to break Daga's record. That sneaky spider went right ahead and stole the guy's record at the final moment. Completely absurd. And the villagers continue enjoying themselves and attempting to break the record of the first champion. But nobody succeeded, and thus the competition concluded. A short time later we see that little Alfred is capable of standing on his own feet, and Hiraku is deeply happy, and Lelouch approaches and mentions that he is growing up so fast, and both feel nostalgic. Later on Ursa asks why Alfred does not speak, and Hiraku comments that he will speak in due time, and hopes that soon he will say Papa. Although Lelouch makes it clear that first he will say Mama, Flora interrupts, making it clear that first he will say Tia, and soon everyone begins arguing to hear what Alfred will say first. However, in the midst of this Anne appears and asks them to stop being so persistent, because Alfred is merely a baby, yet saying just that was enough for Alfred to utter her name, which deeply moves Anne. She comments that he is honoring her far more than she deserves, and everyone asks for Alfred to say their names, and the second word that he speaks is Zabuton. Looking for Zabuton, without hesitation she weaves an outfit for the prince, and so for a period of time all of the citizens would go to see Alfred, in an attempt to get him to say their respective names. Thus time passes, and later Hiraku meets with Fuashu, who arrives to inform that just as she had promised she came to express her gratitude, since without his medicine her son would not have been saved. Just as she promised, she brings along the new residents he was searching for, both men and women, and Hiraku gets exceptionally thrilled because finally he will not be the only man there, thereby resolving the lack of male residents. He expresses great thanks to Fuashu, although he notices that the new residents are a bit nervous, and upon noticing this Hiraku approaches them, and introduces himself as the village chief, trying to reassure them. He knows perfectly well that when arriving at a new location, one brings along new worries, but there is nothing to be concerned about, and they end up calming down a bit, while Fuashu bids farewell to Hiraku, because she has many things to attend to, asking him to take good care of them. Upon her departure Hiraku sets out to show the village to all of the new residents, while Fuashu feels relieved that she was finally able to fulfill her promise, and lifted a heavy weight off her shoulders. Yet she ends up remembering that it took considerable effort to accomplish what she did. Now we see how a while ago Fuashu began drafting a document in search of people who wished to live in Big Tree Village, and also assigned the task to her guards. Then they recommended sending slaves, although she opposed the idea, because slaves could potentially rebel. The guard proposes taking some from the dungeons, but she refuses, asking why on earth they have to choose shady individuals. The guard replies that he chooses those people because she is wishing to send them to the Forest of Death, which is practically a death sentence. Fuashu understands that that place is filled with terrible rumors, but not a single bad rumor about that village is true. She knows that once she explains, people will come to understand. Unfortunately, nobody would enter the forest of death of their own free will. And after a massive effort of pulling quite a few strings, she sought out the youngest ones, who are raised by the government, so to speak. Obviously, she had to perform a background investigation on them, and came across the fact that one was the son of a tyrannical king who exiled him. Another was the illegitimate child of nobility. In short, several backgrounds that could potentially cause some trouble. Fuwashu rolled up her sleeves and cleaned up the mess, dethroned the tyrant, stripped the nobles of their riches, since parents who simply abandon their children should not be nobles. In short, a whole lot of actions, all with the intention of being able to bring the residents to Big Tree Village. But in the end, she did not even end up revealing that she was taking them to the Forest of Death. The important thing is that in the end, everything turned out well, and she ended up fulfilling her promise, and knows that in that place they are going to be happy. The new residents are very happy upon seeing their new homes, which are located in Village 2, where the Nunu Daffys resided. But if they continued there, it would look like a village consumed by nature. So in the end, everything began to progress very smoothly. Or perhaps not entirely, since the detail is that all of the people in the village are monsters with extreme physical strength, and for normal humans the simple task of carrying a log of that size is an impossible feat. For that reason, in the end, Hiraku assigned them to transcribe books and documents, taking advantage of the fact that Fuwashu taught them to read and write, in addition to also constructing a printing press. And if everything went well, they could even have their very own industry. Some excelled in art and others in weaving, and they presented a few gifts to Alfred. Some could summon lesser spirits to perform certain everyday tasks, making them much easier and more manageable. And upon nightfall came the time to eat. And everyone was surprised because they thought that all of the food was decoration, since never before had they seen anything of that sort. Before eating, Hiraku notices that some people are talking and whispering, so he approaches to ask what is going on. And he realizes that some are afraid of the elves, due to rumors that they kidnap men, and Ria approaches to ask what is going on. Hiraku ends up explaining that the young women believe that they will be devoured by men, and Ria makes it completely clear that they are mistaken, since those hypotheses originate from a minor tribe of her people. They were weak and pathetic, and the simple fact that they were captured demonstrates just how foolish they were, since if it were her, she would do it far too quickly, and kidnap them without them even noticing. Hiraku then says that in reality she is scaring the boys. But now at last, the time to eat finally arrives. Everyone then delights in the meal, and last and Hakure approach Hiraku to comment and ask if he knows her. But Hiraku has not the slightest idea, and last comments that once her grandfather told her a story, in which once there existed people who drank dragon blood. Their descendants became known as dragon maidens, and Hakure wonders if by any chance that means she can sense them, commenting that according to their traits, or at least the rumors, they have scales on their backs, in addition to also saying that they can soothe curious dragons. The young women approach her and make it clear that they are dragons, introduce themselves and ask what kind of songs she sings, assuming that she sings to relax them. But the girl finds herself extremely lost, and Hiraku tries to calm her down, and warns that she should not worry because they do not bite. But outside the village, high up in the skies, we see a strange structure, and inside it, what appears to be a demon is observing the young girl in Big Tree Village. A short time later, Hiraku manages to notice that there is something floating very far away in the sky. Although since it is so far, obviously he cannot see it, so Lelouch gives a telescope to him, which allows Hiraku to see that it is a giant, floating rock. Later, Tia and Gran Maria inform that atop it there is a massive castle, which appears to be very ancient. And not only that, it seems that that huge rock is moving, since the day before it was in the forest. But much further away, little by little it has been approaching, and at the moment the young women have been keeping watch from a safe distance, so they do not know whether the castle is in ruins or if it is inhabited. Gran Maria then asks Tia if that could be something they are familiar with, but she replies that it is far too early to think about that. Lelouch would love to examine it closer, but she knows very well that this could be quite dangerous. However, the mere idea of a castle floating in the sky greatly piques her interest, especially the interest of our dear Hiraku. But such lack of concern is only permissible if there is no danger. However, out of nowhere a strange hologram appears in the village, and what appears to be a demon introduces himself as the owner of the flying castle. He says that they are merely pathetic humans, and that their presence and hopes will be utterly useless. The girls understand that he appears to be an enemy, and Hiraku, upon also understanding and seeing which direction he is in, decides to get rid of the castle using his divine spear. But he ends up missing the first attack and strikes the lower portion. Yet he understands that he has to raise his aim a bit higher, and before launching the second attack the demon quickly drops to his knees begging for forgiveness. A short time later he explains everything. He says that he is a demon, and that the castle in the sky is called the Sun Castle. He tells that 1,000 years ago, there was a battle between humans and demons. This castle belonged to the deities who ended up aligning with the humans, and after a fierce battle the demons expelled the deities and took this castle. And he is one of the descendants of those demons, who ended up settling around there. And Hiraku thanks him for the explanation, but still does not understand why he is heading toward his village. But Kiwazu replies that he does not know because the castle is on autopilot. It is an ancient pact that drives it to move in order to help humans. Or at least that was what the castle announced before starting to advance. Hiraku replies that even so he saw him far too excited, and Kiwazu apologizes. But it is something that had never happened to him, so he ended up wanting to take advantage of the opportunity. And Tia comments that now they know who he is, and the best thing will be to finish him off quickly. But Hiraku reminds her that he has already surrendered. Kiwazu also told that this castle was a complete nest of monsters, and if they arrive and attack them without thinking, a multitude of monsters could fall upon them. However, seeing a castle floating above them, the best option would be to infiltrate. Tia informs Hiraku that they will find a way to control the castle, so Hiraku asks how she plans on doing that. Tia reveals that the deities are actually the ancient name of the angels, and he asks why they changed their name, and she states that the ancient angels tended to be a bit proud, and think that it would be best to bury that name forever. Upon seeing their faces, Hiraku thinks it is best not to ask any more questions, and the infiltration group is composed of Yurushi, Tia, the trio of angels, Hakure, Daga, and Ria, while the group that will attack from below will be Gritanai and the Wolf Pack, and thus the operation to take over the castle commences. And Hiraku remains waiting at his improvised headquarters, observing the destruction of that floating vessel while enjoying his little cup of tea. Right then Ursa approaches him asking what on earth he is doing, and he replies that he is supervising the battle, and what a fine supervision he is conducting. Ursa ends up stating that he is lying, since in truth they put him to play with the children, and as a supreme commander he makes a fine farmer. Thus he continues playing and later eating with the young ones, while the operation to take control of the castle continues. Finally at nightfall the young ones contemplate the operation, and bring Kiwazu along with them. He begs for forgiveness for everything since he simply got carried away, and if he had known what awaited him he would have never attempted it. In the end Hiraku ended up freeing him, because he did not like seeing anyone or at least a man begging. They converse while eating, and Hiraku asks Kiwazu what he ate inside the castle, and he replies that he only ate dungeon cockroaches, since it was the only thing he managed to cultivate. Poor guy. Hiraku also pities this poor suffering soul, which is why he gives him additional onigiri. Kiwazu comments that he would like his friends, who are still inside the castle, to taste that food, if possible. Hiraku, like any good philanthropist, hands over more food for him to take to his friends, and soon asks Tia how the takeover of the castle is progressing. She replies that it will take some time to manage to gain control over it, and Kiwazu comments to Hiraku that the deity's present right there, and he stops right there, because Tia glares at him with a broad smile, but with very different intentions, asking Kiwazu if by any chance he forgot the little chat they had earlier. She asks what happened to the deities, and he, completely terrified, replies that they became extinct, and that now they are called angels. She congratulates him, and asks him to continue eating, while Hiraku wonders what kind of conversation that was that they had. Sometime later Hiraku finds himself preparing a dessert for the castle takeover team, and as he heads toward his office, Bezel appears, who comments that since he noticed they were fighting something, he went over there to see what was happening. Hiraku, somewhat curious, asks Bezel if by any chance this castle does not belong to the Demon King, but he replies that in truth he would say it is an enemy. Hiraku explains that as far as they know the demons conquered it, but Bezel tells him that he had no information regarding that, so they were likely demons who lived outside the kingdom. Having said this, he bids farewell, because he likely only went there to eat the jam. Suddenly a ray of light appears, and Hiraku understands that it is a signal from the girls. Last and Hakuren begins circling overhead, and Hiraku understands that he has to aim at that location. Upon attacking, the rest of the debris crumbles down, but the castle does not fall down by any means. And later, while Hiraku is making his handcraft pieces, Hakuren appears to retrieve him, because they have almost finished. Very happily they head toward the castle, although upon approaching he feels that the air has changed, and it is feeling much warmer. He assumes that perhaps this castle controls the atmosphere around it in order to fly, and upon landing in the castle square, Hiraku notices the people who as soon as they see him begin acting, or at least so it seems. The elder tells the young girl not to protect him, because monsters cannot live with him. Seeing this, Hiraku asks the girls if by any chance this happens very frequently, and Yurushi replies that this has been happening ever since he arrived, meaning, it is only now that they are doing this. Hiraku understands that they are doing this to draw his attention, and because of that decides to step in before the scene becomes eternal. Upon approaching, Hiraku talks with the little girl, and soon we understand that they staged this scene so that the little girl could keep her pet, since the order was to eliminate all monsters in the place. For his part, Kiwazu comes out to receive him and lead him to the audience chamber, where a strange talking crystal is located, which asks Hiraku if by any chance he is the one who will become its master. Kiwazu explains that this is a sort of spirit that controls the castle, and one must be recognized as its master in order to give orders. He tried to convince it, but the spirit always refuses, because the crystal only recognizes a single master, the chosen people of the deities. Hiraku understands that the angels have to start playing their part, but the girls comment that although they would love to help, they are not deities and cannot do anything. Hiraku then decides not to prolong the matter too much, and asks the crystal if by any chance it has a name. The crystal very arrogantly replies that if he wants to know, he must introduce himself first. Hiraku then introduces himself to it, and the crystal introduces itself as the glorious sun. Annoyed, Hiraku ends up humoring it a bit, and asks if it could grant control to the angels, but the crystal replies that they are indeed deities, and Hiraku explains that they do not like to be called that. But to the crystal this only seems ridiculously absurd, since the deities remain deities regardless of what they say. Yet upon saying that, they simply end up receiving a thorough thrashing from the girls, and as the core faces total destruction, it recognizes them as angels and loses all of its arrogance. It asks Kiwazu if they eliminated the monsters in the castle, and he confirms it, and then asks who destroyed the rock beneath the castle, and he reveals that it was his chief, Hiraku. The talking crystal realizes that they are absurdly strong and terrifying, and that at the top of the food chain stands Hiraku, while Kiwazu is someone peaceful and harmless, so it decides to appoint him as its new master of the castle. Kiwazu then cannot believe it, because the crystal had always refused. But the crystal tolerates no nonsense, and quickly registers him as its new master. Through Kiwazu, or through the crystal itself, they will be able to control the castle. And to Hiraku this seems excellent, and he asks if he can ask a question. The crystal replies that if he wishes he can study it, because it is simply a rock, and Hiraku is quite surprised to see that now its arrogance has vanished completely. After that, it is revealed to us that the Sun Core is bound by a pact, according to which it must go to the aid of the dragons whenever they gather around a priestess. Although the sun comments that this is already out of fashion, and Kiwazu cannot believe it, because it was the crystal that said they had to go help, which was the reason why it declared war. But the crystal merely plays dumb, and Hiraku asks if by any chance this pact remains active until now. The desperate sun replies that it has already fulfilled that part of the contract, and it was rendered void, meaning basically the castle will not float above the village. And now, with the problem resolved, the young ones take the opportunity to explore the place. He notices that the demons live in a section of the castle, but their living conditions are pitiful, which means that their life is quite hard. Moreover, the castle had other inhabitants, and Hiraku, to help them, decided to send supplies. While residing in the castle, he notices that their buildings seem to form a city. He also realizes that the massive rock above the castle were remnants of a sabotage operation by the demons of the past, who had concealed monster eggs within the rocks, without realizing that they ended up locked inside the castle. But the girls took charge of pulverizing all of the eggs, and Hiraku finds himself quite curious to know how this castle manages to float. So he begins to investigate, and curiously he ends up finding a door, but inside it there was only a vase. Yet inside it there was another very suspicious vase, and upon using it he ended up right at the entrance of the plaza, and Hiraku ends up awakening his Sherlock Holmes complex, and he returns to the first vase, since it seemed very unusual that the method to enter would be the exact same as to leave. Therefore, on this occasion he ends up turning the vase, and now an elevator is activated, which takes them to a mysterious room, where a very strange woman is located. She comments that she expected him to find her at least 10 years from now, and she asks him to approach while introducing herself as the chief advisor of the sun. Her name is Belleforma, the person who oversees its movements. She comments that they have nothing to fear, although Hiraku mentions that the crystal had also said it was in charge of that. She states that in reality the sun is merely her representative, because she has been there for a very long time, and then asks that they allow her to hand over the item and the message. These items were destined for them in order to fulfill the prophecy. Right then she shows the sword of the sun and asks Hiraku to yield it. Moreover, she reveals the weak point of the Demon King, which is one of his scales on his back. If he aims for it, he will surely defeat him. But Hiraku merely asks her to wait, and states that she is mistaken because he is not a hero, he is a farmer, and Belleforma replies that she already knows that. But the prophecy dictates the arrival of a hero, and if he arrived there he is probably a hero. He tells her that even so he is not going to kill the Demon King, and Belleforma states that he is refusing to assume that role, and this bothered her greatly. If he accepts this sword, she can finally be set free from her torture. Thus she prays that he please take this sword. Hiraku asks if by any chance it is not cursed or something of the sort, and the desperate Belleforma begs for him to take it, since there is nothing bad about the sword. Upon taking it, Hiraku realizes that it is quite heavy, and Belleforma gets deeply emotional, because she had been carrying it for 1,000 years, in addition to being confined to that place until now. But she is finally free. The poor girl had even given up on the idea of ever going out with someone. She then comments to Hiraku that he can do whatever he wants with that sword, so he uses his hoe and simply turns it into soil. And what a fine way to waste a legendary sword. Yet this does not even bother Belleforma in the slightest. In fact, it is completely the opposite. So a short time later Belleforma goes to the location where that cursed crystal was. She is furious since that place is completely filthy, demanding that the miserable crystal be responsible for cleaning everything up, but it said that that was the absolute best it could do. So she asks why the castle is so low on fuel, and the crystal asks if she remembers that human from before. She says yes, since he was the one who assigned her the task of staying there for 1,000 years waiting for someone. Basically, the person who took over the castle afterwards sold off their entire fuel reserve. Moreover, he sold the castle to the deities. And the girls got angry, but it apologizes and states that the angels sold it to the angels. And since they used the castle in combat mode the entire time, it basically exhausted all of the reserves. Kiwazu then attempts to speak, and they begin conversing for a bit, and he asks what will happen to the castle if they run out of fuel. Belleforma simply states that the castle will fall, so Hiraku simply asks why they do not just refill the tank, but she states that they require an extremely rare mineral. It is something called a sunstone, and Hiraku ends up remembering something. So Lelouch pulls out one of those stones found in the hot spring, and asks if by any chance this stone is a sunstone. Belleforma replies that it is. It is then that Hiraku offers to go retrieve some of these stones so they can use them as fuel. Hiraku then organizes a group to go fetch them, since they are desperate. But the crystal reveals that they have roughly 3 years worth of fuel remaining, so there is no need to be in such an extreme rush. Yet Hiraku wishes to do all of this very quickly, so he immediately sets out in search of the stones. Then at night he gathers with his friends to discuss the situation of the inhabitants there. And the next day it is basically resolved that they will become official residents of Big Tree Village. They will reside in Village 4. And after this short official meeting, he goes to take a look at the location to see what they need to repair and reconstruct. A little later after eating, they bring all of the sunstones to Belleforma. She is deeply surprised, commenting that it is a vast amount of stones. She states that if they had possessed all of this in the past, they would have conquered the world. She mentions that besides having a reserve, they could enhance their weaponry, but the crystal states that the weapons were sold off by that cursed noble. And Belleforma is stunned and asks what it used to do to manage to conquer things and assist humans in wars. And the crystal simply states that it activated the force field and charged straight at the enemies. Then a short while later, since the fuel issue was resolved, they need to find a way to ascend more easily to the castle from the ground. So the mountain elf girls begin manufacturing a sort of hot air balloon, but the issue is that they only move vertically, and still rely on the wind. They become deeply worried, but Hiraku calms them down, stating that they will find a way to handle it. And soon afterwards winter arrives, but up at the castle it is not snowing or anything, because basically the structure possesses its own atmosphere. So we see Hiraku who is tending to some flowers, and Kyozu calls him over to the castle. Upon arriving there, he notices that some of the items he had planted have already grown, and it has only been 3 days, and they are quite impressed. Yet basically only the plants grew. They bore no fruit whatsoever, because basically the soil lacks nutrients. Something along those lines. He decides to pull out those plants. Otherwise they will grow immensely and take over the entire castle. And inside the castle everything is going perfectly. The people are starting to enjoy themselves, constructing items and cultivating crops. Everything is working out very well. So after enjoying winter immensely and passing through that period, we see Hiraku gathered with the girls, where Flora suggests to Hiraku that he create a sort of emblem to place in the villages, so everyone knows they are part of Big Tree Village, given that the population is growing quite a bit. Because if they do not do this, the villages could unify and turn against our beloved Hiraku. That would be terrible. Then, one of the girls comments that they could erect a statue of the leader in the villages. Furthermore, they also want portraits and for songs to be sung every night for our beloved Hiraku. However, he states that all of that is unnecessary because he is a simple chief. Yet that is precisely the point. They are thinking of a title to distinguish him from all the other village chiefs. He needs to be someone supreme to command everyone. Thus, they begin brainstorming titles such as True Chief, Supreme Chief, or Royal Chief. He then says that he does not want to single out just one person. He expresses that he wants the emblem to highlight that everyone is united together. Then, he gets an idea and begins to draw, and upon asking the girls, they end up liking it quite a lot. However, now he must ask for the opinion of each of the village representatives. And so, after some time passes, everyone gathers together to hold the grand banquet. Hiraku then begins to deliver his speech. There, he thanks everyone and begins to present his new symbol to represent all the villages and Big Tree Village. Everyone is utterly amazed, and Hiraku states that this emblem is not merely to represent Big Tree Village, but rather everyone. Everyone then begins to celebrate, and thus time passes by. While they are there eating and feasting, the castle passes by overhead, with a few spotlights, creating some very beautiful light displays, and shortly thereafter, Lelouch approaches to converse with Hiraku. After they exchange a few thoughts, Lelouch asks him if he does not like the title of emperor. He replies that chief is more than enough, since to him, titles carry no importance. However, since he does not have much of a choice, he will allow them to simply call him chief. Furthermore, he ultimately welcomed all the inhabitants and created this village. Therefore, he holds the responsibility to care for every single one of them. Lelouch then replies that he should continue just as he is doing, that a title will not change him, because he will always remain true to himself. And our beloved Hiraku remarks that she is right. Right then, little Alfred begins calling them Papa, but shortly after he lies down to sleep, and right after, the girl arrives to take him away and let him rest in peace. And thus, everyone gathers together and begins to feast. And our second season concludes right here. Thank you to everyone who followed along. We are in this together. Stay with God, and until the next video, do not forget to leave a comment down below. Farmer, that is all. We are in this together.